Seven's exclusive of the Australian Touring Car Championship continues today as we return to Sydney for the 10th and final round. 45 kilometres southwest of the city at Narellan, the Oran Park Raceway complex can be found. It boasts a 2.62 kilometre Grand Prix course, all a 1.96 kilometre sprint layout, an international karting track, and soon to be incorporated facilities for drag racing, motocross, and an oval course. Today's Castrol Grand Final of the touring car title game brings together the BMW muscle power of tournament leader Jim Richards, Neville Crichton, Kent Bajan, Glenn Malloy and Tony Longhurst. Kiwi Rob Civic is here with the silver Volvo. Dick Johnson backs up for Ford Mustang. The Commodores should be leading contenders, while Alpha will be represented by Colin Bond and Mazda team recruit Greg Hansford. A new touring champion will be crowned here today, but that's only after Australia's five drivers have played the ultimate horsepower game.
Hello. Well, you've caught me playing a horsepower game of my own, which only seems appropriate. The prancing stallions at El Cabello Blanco, just across the road from the rural setting of Oran Park. Of course, the racetrack has its own thoroughbreds, its own spectacular brand of entertainment, and certainly Jim Richards and W have been the stars of the 1985 season. They've already won the Touring Car Championship. But there are still a few other good colts out there with a point to prove in the final round of the series today, and it remains to be seen whether or not Lord will still be riding tall in the saddle at the end of the day. But we've got a big program to get through, so here's Mike Raymond.
Thanks, Gary Wilco, the original gay blade from Narellan. And here we have the cars coming onto the circuit for our first event on the telecast today, our Formula 2 National Championship, and it's also good afternoon to Neil Crompton.
Yes, good afternoon, Mike. Good afternoon, Gary, and everybody. Yes, in the ninth and final round of the Australian Formula 2 Championship as we look here at the cars on their warm-up lap prior to gridding up for the event. And let's take a look at the grid, the way they'll line up for this round 9. On the front row of the grid will be Peter Glover with a time of 1 minute 6.3. Alongside him, arch rival Peter McCrow in the Cheetah Mark 8. The second row consists of Queensland's Bob Power in the Rolt, and alongside him in the Cheetah is Derek Pingle. The third row of the grid, Steve Swain, alongside him, Neil Israel. The fourth row of the grid, after some hurried work overnight, Arthur Abrahams and Mark Power. The fifth row of the grid is Paul Thomas with John Hendricks, and rounding out the top 12, Steve Noble and Craig Sparks. There's another 10 or so drivers behind them, and they'll be competing around the Grand Prix length course here, which is 2.62 kilometres, a total journey of just over 52 kilometres, 20 laps of the Grand Prix circuit.
And we should say a tremendous crowd has turned out today for the final round, the Castrol final of the Australian Touring Car Championship. There you can see there, probably the biggest crowd we've seen here at Oran Park for quite some time. And the cars now on their second warm-up lap. And really, I guess it's a case of the same names at the front half of the field.
Very much so, and the man that we look at here, Peter Glover, is the reigning champion in the Formula 2 class. He leads the points table with a total of 205.5 points. Behind him, the man who is immediately behind him, Peter McCrow, with 192. And in third place in this championship is Graham Blee from Victoria, 102.5 points. There's 30 points up for a win in this series final. And so it is possible to speculate that if Peter Glover was far enough down through the field, Peter McCrow could win this championship today. Bob Power there in the orange and white car. That's Derek Pingle in the white car. In fact, it's a very healthy field of Formula 2s. Oh, goodness me.
One's run off over there. Number 5. That's Derek Pingle.
Yeah, well, that's not the way to get things started early in the day.
Not the way to warm your tyres up on the grass there.
One of the problems they have with Formula 2 cars is that they all run what's called a control tyre. In other words, the compound in these tyres is identical for every car, and they are notoriously hard tyres, very difficult to get temperature into. The forecast top here at Oran Park, should I say, this afternoon is 18 degrees, and some of the Formula 2 competitors were saying earlier on today that they're having a lot of difficulty trying to warm their tyres up. But they've had 2 warm-up laps now, and Peter Glover, Peter McCrow will share the front row of the grid, hopefully with a bit of warmth in them, and they'll be ready for battle. 20 laps, as I said, and it should be fairly interesting. And watch also the man in the yellow car, who's back about 6 cars there at the moment, Arthur Abrahams. Had some problems in practice yesterday, but is looking for what could ultimately be third place in this national championship at the end of today's race, and has got the form on the board if he can get things together.
There's Peter Glover in the Dinsan nursery entry. Been a model of consistency throughout the season, and I would think red-hot favourite to win here today.
He should be. He has out-qualified Peter McCrow by some 0.5 of a second. McCrow was fastest yesterday in the first session, but then Peter Glover came back and did his customary charge to the top of the grid in the second leg. Second leg of practice, with now just less than 1 minute remaining prior to the start.
Peter McCrow and Peter Glover sit on the front row for this final round of the Australian Formula 2 Championship, with Bob Power and Derek Pingle right behind them. We await the start as the engines are brought to full pace, about 6 seconds away from the start. Flag is down, and Peter McCrow, but Glover on the inside, and the black machine just belts out of there so quickly indeed, and will head McCrow for the first time, with Derek Pingle making a move up here on the inside as they come down to Pepsi corner for the first time. So Glover, the outright favourite, but locking a break-up, is in front, clear of McCrow as they go into the left-hander, and there's the traffic congestion.
Steve Swain came up into fourth placing in the blue car. So the order at the moment, Glover, McCrow, and Locks are front again. What a great way to get started, Peter. To the right-hander, the new part of the course here at Oran Park. There's Bob Power in the orange and white car as they come through the right-hander at Bitchapave and line up to cross the top of the Goodyear Bridge.
Coming up to the bridge, there's our special camera hooked up showing you the line as they come across the bridge and veer across to the right. And the scrap continues between Peter Glover, fast qualifier yesterday, and Peter McCrow, who has tagged him all year long for the Formula 2 Championship. Pingle is back behind those two, probably about 3 or 4 car lengths, but Glover will lead them down into Castrol, the left-hander, and locks up again. So having problems, there's car number 6 with problems, and that, of course, was Tom Brickley, and he is off the course. So Glover leads across for the completion of 1, and 19 remain. This time, McCrow sits right in behind him as they come down to Pepsi corner for the second time. Trying to get some heat into those tyres.
McCrow got very close to the back of Glover as they came down the chute that time. We'll see how Peter Glover lines up for the right-hander this time. Nice and clean, so it may have been just over-exuberance on Glover's behalf in the first lap, with still Pingle in third position from Queensland. Between Glover and McCrow, nobody else has won a round of this year's Formula 2 Championship, and Glover has only dropped the Lakeside round, which Peter McCrow won. So between them, they've had first and second right throughout this series.
Pingle still holding down third place, but dropping back off the pace behind McCrow. There's Glover again down to Castrol. Beautiful line as he comes out of the corner, using the full width of the racetrack and opening that gap over Peter McCrow as they move into the second time around.
Bob Power's getting a little bit closer to the back of Derek Pingle as well. Had a lot of trouble yesterday with the clutch master cylinder. Have a look at that second group of cars as they go underneath the Goodyear Bridge. Still very little separating first from second. McCrow, I'd say, is in a fairly nice position here at the moment. He can afford to sit there and watch Glover, find out whether or not there are any weaknesses and perhaps try and explore them. And it's around about 5 to 6 seconds back to the second bunch of cars. You'll see the gap. McCrow rounding out his Formula 2 Championship this year, and then they convert this car back to Mondial specifications, in other words, Australian National Formula 1, fitting the 1600cc twin overhead cam Ford BDA engine, increasing horsepower and rearranging weight distribution. Onto the straight again. Still Glover leading McCrow, leading Pingle and Power. Those two leaders are pulling well away. And in fact, news coming through now that Bob Power has also moved up 1 spot ahead of Derek Pingle.
Peter McCrow, not a spring chicken at all, Neil. Been racing for quite a while. Likes to give his age at 21.
This is not, though. In fact, you and I were flicking through a magazine earlier in the week, which goes back about 15 years, and he was climbing out of a burning open wheeler. So Peter's been around a while, 44 years of age. He's raced all kinds of cars, finished second in this particular class in 80, 81 and 2. So he's been bridesmaid just once too often as far as he's concerned. Victorian Formula 2 champion back in '81, and as I said before, has been known to run in Australian National Formula 1 and finished 5th in that class back in '83. Both the lead cars are identical. They're the Melbourne-built Cheetah Mark 8s, and there is Craig Sparks, car number 33 from South Australia, out of business. Both of them powered by the English-built Judd Golf engines, the VW Golf engines, and in fact Peter Glover is the importer of those engines.
Worth mentioning, Neil, I think that Peter Macro too has raced touring cars. In fact, finished 4th at Bathurst a long time back with the Holden dealer team.
Nice to see you back, Wilco, too. I'm glad you made it back safely.
Well, you know, just a quick gallop across the outlying paddocks here at Oran Park, and I've tied up at the hitching rail just by the commentary position here.
Yeah, but you haven't cleaned your shoes.
Cross the bridge, and Peter Glover still leads Peter McCrow, and then Bob Power in 3rd, coming up towards Honda Corner. This is the way these two guys have been attacking the Formula 2 Championship all season. That gap between the two of them. They haven't given anyone else really a look in as they go down towards Castrol, and you will have a look at the gap between the race leader, Peter Glover, Peter McCrow, and of course our 3rd place driver, Bob Power. Now there it is there. Power will be the next one interview, so they're opening all the time, probably out to about 4 or 5 seconds at this stage.
Yes, and he, the 3rd place getter Power, has dropped off Derek Pingle by a long way as well, and the man that Neil mentioned earlier, who made such a great start, Steve Swain in the number 3 car, has disappeared back in the pack altogether.
Bob Power, this is the Roll RT3 with a slightly narrower wheelbase than the two cars that we were looking at before. It's the car that Lucio Cesario ran in the Australian Formula 2 Championship a few years back and won the class. Bob Power from Toowoomba in Queensland. Very nice little car, this. One of the original ground effects open wheel cars, which means the side pods left and right of the car actually work as inverted aerofoils and help to drag the car to the road.
There's a few Queenslanders campaigning in this category. I see that Peter Collins is also down in the BTQ Channel 7 car, but they've been dogged by ill luck and really haven't been able to get anywhere near the times being recorded by the top running trio.
Neil Israel also into the pits, so problems there for Israel. And we'll look now for the gap back to our 4th place driver from Bob Power, and that should be Derek Pingle. There's Pingle going through in car number 5. So they've spread themselves out well and truly, still with Glover holding that advantage over Macro. And of course Bob Power and Derek Pingle here in car number 5. The driver had the problems in the warm-up lap, skated out onto the grass, but he's managed to get back and actually going back out after Bob Power at this stage, coming down to Volvo Corner.
We saw Derek Pingle do very well in the Queensland round of their racing car championship about 3 weeks ago. He's had some problems with the engine in this car in the last few rounds of the Formula 2 championship. In fact, he blew a piston at Adelaide, which was the last round of this championship. So the situation, as we're about a 3rd of the way into the race, sees Peter Glover leading in the Cheetah from Peter McCrow in 2nd. And 3rd place at the moment is Bob Power in the Rolls.
Back at Oran Park, coming over the bridge is Neil Israel. Car number 19 stands out, the yellow machine. Oh, Arthur Abrahams, yeah, I call him Neil Israel. My apologies for that. Ought to know, he's been around long enough, and as I said, stands out like a beacon. Comes from Melbourne.
Yeah, this is the old Keith McClelland car that we saw very early in this year's championship. Continued backing from Ignis and Haniel, a freight forwarding company, and Arthur Abrahams having, I think, his 4th outing in the car this weekend. He had a lot of problems in practice yesterday, took the car off out in the mud and the boondocks and bent the entire left-hand side, damaged the front wing, broke a rim, broke both the front and rear suspension rocker arms. Went out and just went a little bit too quick on very cold tyres.
He's up into 5th place at the moment, but a long way from Glover and Macro. In fact, the spaces between the place getters in this race are getting very, very wide, aren't they?
They certainly appear to be. The
Formula 2 Championship, as we mentioned, led by Glover over McRae. There's the gap from 5th back to 6th.
Abraham's finished fourth at the 5th round of this championship at Calder. Picked up another 4th at Mallala in South Australia, and then again 4th at Adelaide at the last round. As I said before, he has the chance to perhaps finish in 3rd overall today if he can keep it on the island.
Halfway mark in this race, 10 laps down, 10 to go. Seems to me, with all the spaces between the cars in Formula 2 and all the spaces between the cars in Formula Mondial, why don't they mix the two together and close up the gaps?
That's being spoken about at the moment, Gary, although the Formula 2 drivers aren't particularly impressed at that idea, although the Formula 1 drivers, who are finding it very difficult to get a full grid of cars at the moment, probably welcome the idea. I mean, I don't know what's right or wrong with that one. There's all kinds of arguments for and against, but one thing's for sure, for our audiences and for all the people here at Oran Park enjoying motor racing, I'm sure they'd like to see some cars much closer together and certainly a full field of cars.
I think that's the answer to it, really. I can understand the Formula 2 drivers not welcoming the other category back in. The name of the game has to be not 15 drivers enjoying a run around against the clock. The whole business of motorsport is entertainment value for the spectators who make it all possible. And if the spectators aren't turning up to some of the open wheeler races, something has got to be wrong. So hopefully they'll be able to get to a result before the start of next season. The racing has been entertaining, very fast. As we said before, very, very little overtaking because of the way that they are spread out so quickly in a race.
The big problem with this kind of racing, Mike, I guess it's very much the same with all forms of motorsport, but you really need a great big bucket of money to be able to keep these things competitive. You tend to find that the guys, and here's Bob Power in trouble with the wings hanging off the car. How on earth he did that?
Have to get a black flag here, will he? For sure. Well,
Depends whether the steward decides it's going to endanger any other competitors.
If he hits a bump or two, and that's unlikely because now that they've resealed Oran Park, the track is just so smooth compared to the bumpy surface they had here last year. So it's probably going to hang around there until it hits the ground and then manages to flick off over onto the grass.
Yeah, but if somebody's in close proximity behind him, there's not at the moment, but if they were and it does flick off, I wouldn't like to be in the car behind him.
Well, you can pick up the
sound of it dragging.
The sound of it dragging there now, and Derek Pingle, in fact, is starting to make a run on Power. Has
Flaps
picked
down.
him up. Black flag coming up for Power.
Yep.
So that's unfortunate. I wouldn't think that he's hit anything, just the fact that the car, or the wing rather, has come adrift.
Actually, I think the flag that they showed him was the bad sportsmanship flag, which is black with a big orange dot in the middle, and that's an unusual one to display to somebody with a problem with their car. So I guess we'll have to wait and see, but Pingle getting very much closer to the back. Once you destroy the aerodynamics of an open wheeler, then you get into all sorts of strife. And Bob Power will tell you all about that at the moment. Under the bridge, there's Pingle.
Well, there's Bob Power trying to limp around in this final round of the Australian Formula 2 Championship. Half a wing and a prayer. And behind him, Derek Pingle closing quickly in car number 5. And Pingle should be able to pass him. I would think at this stage he wouldn't want to sit too close in behind him. Now he moves to the outside.
Puts him back in 3rd place.
Power waved him by. And I would expect perhaps to see Power come into the pits. Now he continues.
Oh, I thought the flag was out for him.
Yeah, well, as I said before, the flag they showed was the black flag with the orange dot in the middle, which is the bad sportsmanship flag. I don't know why that would be out there, but anyway.
So there's Derek Pingle in car number 5. Started well, was running 3rd in the opening lap until passed by Power, but he's been able to get back by Power again. Hasn't altered the race lead, though. Peter Glover still very, very comfortably in front of Peter McRae.
6 laps remaining. Peter Glover leads, Peter McRae in 2nd place, and Derek Pingle holds down 3rd.
only half the field survive in this final round of the Australian Formula 2 Championship here at Oran Park with 4 laps remaining. This is the race leader, Peter Glover, and has done it well right from the moment the checkered flag dropped. Peter Macro pursues him relentlessly, but to no avail at this stage. The gap must be about 280 metres between the pair. And a long way back to the third place getter, Derek Pingle, at this stage. Bob Power, who did hold down third and then was flagged off the track because his wing was loose on the rear of the car, has had it repaired and is back out there circulating, but well out of contention.
Yes, I have to make an apology to the stewards here too, Gary, because I was running around saying it was a bad sportsmanship flag. In fact, the 85 ruling, as I sit here and read my CAMS manual, tells me that that in fact means there is something hanging off the car, so one should look at his facts and figures before he quotes things.
Here's our race leader, Glover, coming up on some slower cars. Macro is not that far back behind him, still in a position to pounce if anything goes wrong, but Glover has run this race just so well. It's at a very nice pace at the front of the field, edged away, of course, from Peter Macro, and heading up once again towards Honda Corner. Macro will shortly be coming up on a couple of these slower cars as a group of 3 just ahead of him. If he's held up for any length of time, you'll find that he'll have Peter Macro right on his back wheel. There's the gap. There's 3 cars in front, about to be passed here by Peter Glover as they come down the straight, this time with only 2 laps remaining in this final round of the Australian Formula 2 Championship.
Well, for Macro to win the championship, Glover would have to fade right back through the field at this stage, and that doesn't look like happening. I think he's going to win the final round and clinch the championship.
Bob Power there waving by Peter Glover. And
Graham
now Peter
Lee as well in car number 2.
So Glover sits in behind car 2. We'll watch the exit. There's the exit off the bridge. And there's Peter Macro going through.
He is closing up now that Glover started to get into that slower traffic. It wouldn't be more than about 70 or 80 metres, the gap between first and second now, and that's only a fraction of a second at these speeds.
A lap and a half remaining as they come up towards Pepsi Corner. There's Peter Glover sitting in behind car number 2, Graham Lee, and Peter Macro making a run right behind Glover now. He's caught Glover up.
Yeah.
But whether he's got the top end down the straight now, because Glover just pulls down the inside and sits in as Macro makes a lunge down here on the inside, but he's not going to pick up this slower car before the right. Yes, he does. Glover gets through there nicely. And
Macro doesn't.
No.
Now he does. Pulls out wide. Less than a lap to go. But although Macro's made ground there through the slower traffic, it hasn't been enough.
Coming up to Bitchapave, and off Bitchapave now up over the Goodyear Bridge. There's the shot. 1-2. Go across the bridge. Glover there in car number 1 towards Yamaha. And although Peter Macro was able to close up and those slower cars were involved, he's lost that advantage again to Castrol. And coming out of Castrol, checkered flag is up, and Peter Glover will go on and take the Alpha Couriers Australian Formula 2 Championship round at Oran Park this afternoon, and in doing so will wrap up the national title. Confirmation of placings: Glover the winner, second place going to Peter Macro, and third to Derek Pingle. And welcome back to Oran Park. No, it's not the original Goodyear blimp, but one of the balloons flying out of the infield here today. Well, we've seen an exciting conclusion to the Australian Formula 2 Championship for 1985. Peter Glover, who has been up front for the entire series across Australia, has gone on to win this afternoon's round from Peter Macro, and of course Derek Pingle. And I suppose it was a foregone conclusion, the fact that Glover had the points on the board and of course sat on pole position for this event. and he's managed to be able to put a win together, and that's a rather complete series for Peter Glover here at Oran Park this afternoon. There's a section of the huge crowd that has turned out, not only for the Australian Formula 2 Championship round, but of course the Castrol Grand Final of the Australian Touring Car Championship. One of the drivers who hasn't made it through, car number 78 or 79, caught down at the back part of the course.
John Heinrichs it is, yeah.
Well, a fellow who obviously has made it is Peter Glover, and with Peter Glover is Neil Crompton.
After 20 laps of round 9 of the Australian Formula 2 Championship, Peter Glover once again takes another victory. In fact, Peter, it's your 7th victory, and in doing so, you take the National Formula 2 crown. Congratulations. It must be very, very rewarding.
Rewarding, yes, it is. It's quite rewarding, thanks, Neil. No, I'm very pleased. I'm pleased for the guys that have helped us, Mike Borland and Dinsand Nurseries in Melbourne. They've helped us too, and it's sort of satisfying that everybody puts in and helps us, and we're able to give them a result.
Where to from here? 2 championship wins so far in 2 years. It's pretty good stuff.
I don't really know, to be perfectly honest. I'll just have to sort of sit down and have a bit of a think about it for a while. I don't know.
Congratulations once again. Please accept the trophy from Alpha Couriers and Max. A very well done job.
Alpha Courier, well done. Congratulations.
Yes, well, I'd like to thank Alpha Couriers for supporting our Formula 2 race here. We appreciate anyone that supports Formula 2.
And of course, the man who did very, very well and followed you right through the championship, I'm sure that we should, well, pay some respect to Peter, who's tried very hard again this year. Pete, you couldn't quite make it.
Thank you very much. No, Peter was very good. I must congratulate him again on a marvellous year. We've both had a very good year. We've both been through the whole series without a DNF. I'd like to thank my crew, Neil Kennett, Keith Evers. Excuse my voice, it's just about vanished. Repco, without these people, we wouldn't be here. Alpha, the people that put on the race for us, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, both of Peters, and great to watch you throughout the season.
Thank you very much.
So, Peter Glover, once again victorious in the Australian Formula 2 Championship. The action continues in just a moment at Oran Park.
Welcome back to Oran, southwestern Sydney. This is one of the very fast tracks of Australia. Down the main straight, back into 4th gear through a fast, pretty fast left-hander, then down into 3rd for a reasonably tight left-hander that keeps it round and around and around. Under the bridge, stay in 3rd gear, a really hard stop, back into 2nd gear for a right-hander, which is one of the new parts of the circuit they have modified. Upper gear into a right-hander around the wall here. The car on this particular part of the circuit coming up to the bridge gets very light over a couple of bumps here. This car handles extremely well into another right-hander. It's one of the few circuits that works left and right-hand side tyres. This is a very fast corner, this one. Then what the bikies call the flip-flop. Up into 4th gear through an S over the top of the hill. Coming down into the concrete wall here. Back to 3rd. Hard on the throttle to get out of here and let it run right out to the wall. Down the main straight again. And that's Oran Park Raceway.
Thank you, Dick Johnson, the man with pole position for today's race. Well, what about the man who thought he had pole position for today's race, Peter Brock?
Yeah, me and a few other people thought I had pole, I might add, but it's apparently not so. I'll believe it when I get to the grid, actually.
2nd row of the grid. I mean, you're still right there. Series is over. Jim's got the cup tucked under his arm, but there are important things, points to be proved.
Oh, yes, I think it's always important to make every post a winner. That's something that Harry Firth taught me about 15 years ago. He said, when you're out there, Brocky, you've got to always give it your best shot, and it's something I've always stuck by. But I had to admit, I suppose, over this Touring Car Championship Series that we haven't had the competitive machinery I would have liked to have had. Nevertheless, we've made the best with what we've had and always planned each race with improvements that can come into fruition at this year's Bathurst.
Okay, the sprint series is over after today and the longer distance races are to come. What about competitive machinery there?
Well, the car takes on really a new light as from all Sunday night tonight, and We now can run. We run a different engine. We don't run different gearbox, different front suspension, different brakes, different weight in the car, which is vital. And all in all, it's going to take quite a little bit of work, I think, to get that car running as nicely as possible before the next Amaroo race in about, what, sort of month's time. So that's going to be very much a new learning exercise again, but I think a far more competitive Commodore.
Okay, well, there's a race to run today, and you don't seem to be too upset about this blue over the pole.
Look, what can you do? I mean, honestly, I was just staggered when they said that there'd been a mix-up because we all got the time, and I thought, oh, well, it's not meant to have pole position, that's all there is to it. But then again, 35-odd laps, the car is running hard, and I look forward to a nice competitive race.
Peter Brock may not be on pole, but still in the thick of things for today's final round of the Australian Touring Car Championship here at Oran Park.
And welcome back to Oran Park Raceway. Well, it's the last hurrah today for Peter McLeod and the Slick 50 Mazda RX-7, a car that ran in Group C touring car trim last year and was a consistent winner. And it's been a consistent winner in the sports sedan category. A little sorrowful today, Peter McLeod. It's been a great car for you, Peter.
It's been a terrific car, Mike, and I'm very sorry to see it go. We've put a lot of hard work into the car, and it's rewarded us with a lot of fun and a lot of results, you know, winning results, and been very successful.
In the sports sedan category that you've run it in this year, you must have been delighted with your performance recently at Lakeside and the great scraps there with Gary Scott.
Yes, we've been running with Gary in a lot of races so far this year in the sports sedan category, and actually through the whole year we've run under lap record times for the old Group C records as they were. And because the car's still in full Group C trim, that was very pleasing to us to think that we were as quick as anyone had ever been in the Group C touring car around nearly every circuit in Australia that we raced at, and we had a lot of fun.
The showing of the car at Lakeside, did that have anything to do with the fact you've attracted a Queensland buyer?
Well, it may have. Certainly the showing of the car at every circuit that it's been to, in Adelaide and Amaroo and whatever this year, has maintained its value, I think, because it's been proven to be a very, very capable motor car, and I think a car that can continue to compete in sports car or sports sedan categories successfully with very few modifications, if any.
Is there life after Mazda? Obviously, it's a Commodore coming up and you're going back to Group A touring car racing.
Yes, touring car racing is where it's at for me. I suppose I was spoiled by being involved in Group C and in Bathurst, and my opinion of Australian motor racing is that Bathurst is what it's all about, the rest is only practice. And if you can't race at Bathurst, well, there's not much point in having a car in the way it affects me. I'm just a Bathurst freak. So I've got to build whatever is necessary to be competitive at Bathurst, and I believe with the regulations the way they are now, a Commodore is the only car that I as a privateer can afford to both build and maintain, and I believe it will be competitive. Even this year, with the problems that there have been in the homologation of some of the engine parts and the fact that we're running the down horsepower engine, I still believe at the end of the day at Bathurst that a Commodore will be there.
All right, I think we might allow Peter McLeod to go and put his helmet on, of course have his last fling here in the sports sedan category in the Mazda 50. We'll follow his progress. Meanwhile, it's back to Gary Wilkinson.
Thundering sports sedans are on the grid. In fact, for this race, the Soleil Sports Sedan final, 8 laps of the short circuit, and this is the way they shape up on the grid. That's Bob Tyndall sitting on pole position. Alongside him on the front row, Jeff Barnes in car number 9. Second row, Des Wall and Laurie Attard, followed by Gary Scott and Mike Griffin. Then on the fourth row, Joe Said and Peter McLeod. Glenn Seaton and Tony Herbert on the fifth row, 1 minute till the flag drops. Gary McFadden and John Vernon share the sixth row of the grid, but there's a big field of 24 starters for this race.
It is a big field indeed, Gary, with Tyndall and Barnes on the front row. Then watch for the scrap between Gary Scott in the Armstrong Nissan 104 and of course Peter McLeod in the Slick 50 Mazda. Car number 50. 30 seconds before the start. The run down to Pepsi Corner should be spectacular. The first of the left-handers as they all try and squeeze their way through there, utilising the shorter course here at Oran Park this afternoon.
It's the biggest sports sedan entry they've had for a long time.
About 8 seconds away from the start. And it's Barn Tyndall's and 59 got an absolute flyer down the inside. Fadden, as he comes down here on the inside looking for the race lead, but I think it'll be Barnes to lead. Here comes Tyndall storming back down on the inside, so Tyndall will take over second. There's the jostling going on. Mike Griffin going through in car number 41, and back behind him in car number 50 is Peter McLeod. There's Gary Scott looking for the run down on the outside. He'll cut back to the inside as they come up towards Yamaha corner, but over the top, and it will be Barnes leading from Tyndall at this stage as they come down towards Castrol for the first time.
I think the stewards might be tapping their feet waiting for 59 McFadden to come back in. He must have jumped the start by a full 2.5 seconds there.
Oh, there's Scott around sideways on the main straight. He's going to get out of harm's way. Could have been tapped in from behind. One going via the ditch, the dipper, and in all sorts of problem, but he's managed to park himself down there, and he's out of harm's way.
It'd be wise to stay there, wouldn't it?
I would think so. Barnes, meantime, will lead it back onto the short track. The winner of a sprint race here earlier this morning, and he's showing fine form. Jeff Barnes, car number 9, leads over Yamaha, and now heading up to the flip-flop at Honda.
I mentioned, Mike, that this is the biggest field they've had for a long time in sports sedans here. In fact, they had to run 2 heats of about 30 cars each to decide the final field.
Let's have a look at what happened with Gary Scott. Scott, of course, coming out of the bend, getting a touch, I think, from behind here by maybe the car that even jumped to start. And Scott goes around sideways, making sure that he doesn't bring the front of the Armstrong Nissan back in front of the field, and he sits there on the edge of the course. And the one going off into the rough could be there for days.
Yes, and that was Joe Said giving the gentle nudge to Gary Scott.
I don't know what Joe said, but I've got a feeling what Gary Scott's going to say after the race is over. So the race continues with, of course, car number 9, Jeff Barnes leading, but not too far behind him is Bob Tyndall. And in fact, I think Tyndall is closing.
The lead car, with some of the engineering work done by K&A Engineering in South Australia, they helped to prepare and build a very spectacular sports sedan a few years ago that was driven by Tony Edmondson, the V8 powered Alfetta. It's interesting the difference between Amaroo and Oran Park, because here at Oran Park it's the big horsepower V8s, cars like this one here with Bob Tyndall, that seem to be able to put power to the ground and pull away from the cars like Gary Scott's Nissan and Peter McLeod's Mazda.
At Oran Park, people like Bob Tyndall just can't seem to get wound up long enough to get in the race at Amaroo. But here, where they've got some big open spaces and they can stretch out, he really does get in the thick of things. And the 2 leading cars are pulled right away from the rest of the opposition. In fact, McLeod's surprisingly far back in the field based on recent performances. Of course, Peter McLeod, that Mike Raymond spoke to just before the start of the race, having his last outing in the car and would have been looking for a good performance, but as I said, surprisingly, he's back at about 7th or 8th spot.
There's the field going through. We'll wait for Said. Now, here's Said coming through. Joe Said, but back behind him, Mike Griffin making a lunge, and Peter McLeod coming up very quickly in company with Gary Scott. So Scott's made up a lot of ground, but at the moment there's Said in car number 7, almost up on 2 wheels coming out of there. Be giving him a thrill.
The black flag did go out to McFadden as well in car 59, so he'll come into the Clark, of course, at the end of the next lap.
And they'll have a little chat. So there's Said coming out, the backdrop. Wall-to-wall people here at Oran Park as we wind down to round 10 of the Touring Car Championship. Said goes through. Mike Griffin will be the next one to gain ground on him as they come down back onto the loop, onto the short circuit. There's Said, another car sitting behind him. Then McLeod on the tail of Griffin. We'll deal with those shortly. 70. There's Attard running in 4th, then Griffin, and then Peter McLeod being the next one through in car number 50.
Mike Griffin is another former Group C car, now in sports sedan guise. A car on which he spent an awful lot of money and is being rewarded with a pretty fair degree of competitiveness. Not so much here at Oran Park as we've observed, and it's here that the big thundering cars like Bob Tyndall's machine, with 2 laps remaining, powering up and dueling for the lead with Jeff Barnes. There's McLeod.
McLeod gives away a fair bit of weight to Griffin's car. Peter McLeod's Mazda RX-7 weighing in at about 950 odd kilograms. Griffin has got about 150 odd kilograms less than that in total weight. Lots more fiberglass on the car, and the car in fact stripped inside.
McLeod, I think, is racing still closer to the old Group C guys, isn't he?
Yes, the only thing that Peter's done is he's removed the headlights away from the front of the car. He's taken those out, the little flick-up headlights in the Mazda RX-7. And he's also put a fiberglass bonnet on the car. Here's Tyndall, car number 49, coming through the right-hander. And there's the leader, Jeff Barnes, car number 9, the Chevy Monza. Enormous horsepower, but having to thread his way through traffic here at the moment, that's a bit of a nightmare for him as he comes across the top at Yamaha.
Passing Nick Mittenway in 66. Peter Hopwood's been coaching young Nick Mittenway and helping him prepare this car. He's going to be a force one of these days in sports sedan racing.
Coming up to Castrol Corner, and as they come out of the bend, it will be Jeff Barnes coming down to take the checkered flag. So Barnes will be first across. Tyndall is going to salvage second out of this. And third place is going to go to Joe Sed in car number 7. But here's confirmation. Barnes the winner, car number 9. Second goes to Tyndall in 49, and third goes to Sed in 7.
Nobody would argue that the Australian Touring Car Championship has produced hard, tough and fast racing. But for sheer dollars and cents, nothing will equal the Nissan Super Series, where the winning driver after a number of rounds can collect up to $50,000. The series, of course, started at Sydney's Amaroo Park and brought together 11 professional drivers and one Sydney journalist, Peter McKay. McKay didn't have any reservations at first about being the one out in the field.
No, I thought it was great. I really wanted to get into that level of motor racing, and racing against guys of that ability, I thought it would be a great experience.
The series couldn't have started better for you, a win first up at Amaroo Park.
Yeah, that was great. A bit of a surprise, but you take it when you can.
It all started to get a little more serious for the time the second round came around at Adelaide, and the cars were pitching at the end of the straight. And then, of course, there was one incident involving yourself and Gary Rogers.
Yes, that was a little unfortunate. We'd been read the Riot Act prior to that and told by Howard Marston and Freddie Gibson that there should be no untoward biffing and bashing. And then an incident coming onto the bowl, and Gary Rogers ended up on his head. But Fred Gibson, fortunately for me, was right on the spot, and there were mitigating circumstances, and I lived to fight another day.
Do you think when the series was put together that Nissan considered the damage factor after 2 or 3 rounds would be absolutely horrendous?
I think they expected some damage, because you've got to expect it in one make series, but not the damage we saw in the recent rounds.
Yes, going back to Adelaide a fortnight ago, where you were leading one of the events, and then coming together of cars at the end of the straight. Now that looked more than just perhaps a little unintentional bang and then the driver pulling off you. In fact, that went on for quite a considerable period.
It went on forever, it seemed to be. I was going sideways for a long time, and I thought that was a bit over the top, yeah.
Did you complain?
Why?
I should ask you that because, you know, a car that gets into a situation like that and finishes rolling over and over and over and you get hurt in them. I mean, I've seen drivers scrubbed out for less than that.
Yes, but it's not up to the drivers to make these decisions. You have stewards, and I think that the stewards generally do a damn good job and a difficult job, but I think in the last couple of rounds it's been not up to standard.
Well, if Adelaide wasn't bad enough in the incident there, a week later you returned to Amaroo Park and then, of course, the ultimate ride on the wild side.
Well, as soon as I got the hit, it was a pretty solid hit, so I knew I was going somewhere I didn't really want to go. And when it got into the terrain on the inside of the loop at Amaroo Park, I thought there was little chance that I wouldn't roll because it's quite rutty there. And ultimately, I think it was going, and then when it hit a tyre barrier, it just flipped it over. But it was the first time I've been on my head, and it's an interesting experience. But the sad thing there is, of course, that Nissan has to repair the cars, and I think in this area some of the drivers just haven't been meeting their obligations.
Do you think one of the problems could perhaps be there is too much money involved? A Nissan Skyline and $25,000, that's almost $50,000, and I would think the pros would be getting very serious about it in the latter stages.
Sure, when you put money of that size up, you're going to expect pretty solid, torrid racing. But there are racing rules, and I'd like to think that some of these guys, well, I think they should be obeying them, and they're not.
Well, you're a journalist by profession and sometimes race car driver. Do you have any reservations about a similar series for the future?
No, none at all, but I think I'd like to see them policed a little better.
Well, I certainly admire your keenness to want to go again. Peter McKay, who has been a front runner in the Nissan Super Series throughout Australia this year. The damage factor will resolve, though, whether in fact there will be a 1986 series. We'll take a break and then return live to Oran Park.
Back at Oran Park, and it's Formula Ford action time in just a moment. But of course, you remember that last weekend, 7 Sport brought you some very interesting and exclusive pictures. In fact, the first live race cam pictures out of a Formula Ford car. The man that was carrying the camera, Richard Carter. It must have been a rather unusual and, I guess, interesting experience.
Very interesting, Neil. We found in our practice times it slowed us down anywhere between about 0.2 to 0.5 of a second. But we did rebalance the car entirely with the camera in position. So the feel of the car, in fact, was quite okay. We just had the weight penalty plus the aerodynamic penalty.
When you say you rebalanced the car, what did you do?
It's very important with an open wheeler to have the same amount of weight on each front wheel and on each back wheel. So with the camera in position on one side, we had too much weight on that corner. So by readjusting the suspension, we finished up with equal weights all round. This is critical, especially under braking.
I guess you've had a chance to look back at some of the footage. What did you think?
I thought it was very good. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of action happening in front of me. I think that would have perhaps doubled the interest. But I guess the viewers at home would have found it interesting nonetheless.
Your car's pretty interesting. 10 years old, about $750, and carrying a $50,000 camera. That's a pretty unusual equation.
It is rather. It's a bit of a worry from my point of view. Yes, it is a very old car. In terms of some of the more modern ones that are racing, and I think it should be encouraging to some of the younger people that want to get into the sport. You don't necessarily need the latest in sophistication. It certainly is an advantage, but an older car like this, providing it's set up correctly, is capable of being up in the front.
We look forward to seeing the pictures again today, and the man that's going to help to get those pictures out of the car is Dave Thomas from 7, the chief technician in the race cam operation and in charge of about 4 guys. Dave, tell us a little bit about the workings of the race cam and the link that you use for it.
Well, Neil, the biggest 2 problems with this sort of setup are vibrations and electrical interference to the electronic equipment. Now, we've done a bit of experimenting over the last few years with rubber shock mounting for the cameras, and as you can see here, we have our shock mounting system. Pretty simple in reality, but a good deal of experimenting and engineering has gone into these mounts to give us what we feel, a pretty acceptable picture. You get a good feeling of speed, a bit of vibration, but in the whole, very smooth. And the other half of the equation is our transmitter here. It's a microwave transmitter, one of the smallest available. It sits on the other side of the car, and on top of it sits a very simple little antenna, which just beams our signal straight up to the helicopter which is flying overhead.
So what are the peculiar problems with open-wheeler race cam pictures as distinct from, say, Dick Johnson's touring car?
Well, there's not so many places to mount a camera outside a car, obviously. Engine interference is a big thing outside a car because you've got no protection from the car itself. And they're the 2 main problems.
So once again, 7 Sport brings you more live and exclusive pictures, and we'll continue our development. The news, of course, is that we may well have race cam for Formula 1 later in the year. Here's Gary.
20 laps of the short circuit at Oran Park for this round of the Formula Ford Driver to Europe Series. This is the way they line up. Thomas Mazira, as ever, is on pole position. Andrew Burton shares the front row. Then we've got Jeff Walters and Richard Carter carrying race cam on the 2nd row. Roger Martin and Gary Jones share the 3rd row of the grid, followed by Barry Ward and Mark Poole on the 4th row. The 5th row, Scott Elson and Alan Bissett, followed in turn by David Stanley and Greg Cantwell. And again, that's just half the very big field.
Will be interesting to follow Richard Carter again. Different terrain. There's Richard speaking with Neil Crompton only a short time ago. Has the race cam hooked up. Qualified without race cam yesterday, made the 2nd row of the grid. Qualified with race cam last week, made the 2nd row of the grid, so it doesn't make that much difference. We're in the starter's hands, and we'll follow Carter as he trails Mazira, Burden, and has Walters alongside of him. Flag is up. And and they're racing, and in fact it was number 5 getting away quickly, Mazira. Here's Mazira going through to take over the lead. Burden next to him. Walters making a run down on the inside of Carter, and Carter is now up on the outside here of Burden as they go down to the short circuit on the outside line. Might have been caught a little wide that time. We'll see if anyone's got through on the inside of him. Yes, one is already through, and a tangle of cars just back behind them. They'll manage to, they're all okay, but they've got the bodywork. Someone's jumped over the top of one of the cars, and the marshal's down there very quickly to pull that car off the circuit.
John Crawford in 61.
Greg Cantwell was in there as well in
Mark
76.
Poole in 37.
So they're going to have a little fiberglass over the circuit. The next time around will be a short lap down into Castrol.
That's a carbon copy of the way things went in the preliminary earlier on today as well. A whole pile of cars getting all tangled up at the left-hander at the end of this straight. End of lap number 1. And this is the view from race cam. There's the leader, Thomas Mazira in the Reynard, car number 5. Left-hander behind him in car number 28, Roger Martin. There's Carter, the Vision Graphics entry, the Maytech. As I said before in that interview, the chassis, the rolling chassis, costing just $750 to build. That's excluding engine. A car that's performing extremely well. Richard, as we've mentioned before, a former winner of this Formula 4 Driver to Europe series.
He's got Walters coming up on his tail this time as they come down up over the flip-flop, and there goes Walters. And you saw that with race cam, just over the top and down into the hollow that is Castrol corner.
Jeffrey Walters was hooking, and he got out very wide in the approach run to the left-hander at Castrol then.
He made a good run at Mazira, still leads. The best run of the race so far to Roger Martin, who came off 5, now settled in 2nd. Walters going through to take over 3rd, and Richard Carter is 4th as we follow them down the straight into the left-hander again. Here's Carter sitting in behind Walters, and Walters has gone wide every time into that corner. Boys, he got his hands full here. They're ducking and weaving there on the inside of him as they join the short circuit now.
Yeah, Carter's lost another place too to car 77, Gary Jones.
He qualified the car well, as I said earlier, on the 2nd row, but using a very wide line to that particular corner. Coming up towards the flip-flop again. Walters just there. There's Carter in car number 8.
The man that leads that bunch, car number 4, Jeffrey Walters in the Logan Holmes entry. He sold his spare engine at Amaru Park last weekend as we take race cam again, and then blew the race engine up here on Thursday, so he had to borrow an engine from Tim Murray, another competitor with an Elwood. So poor old Jeffrey's been having some dramas. But look here, as Gary Jones pulls a move on Jeffrey Walters at the left-hander at the end. Richard Carter again closes up, but again is very wide through the left-hander. Look at this. Andrew Burden goes sneaking through on the inside in the Lola.
Well, Burden was slow to get off the mark, Neil. You'll notice that he shared the front row with Mazira. I think he'd be anything but happy being back that far in the pack.
Andrew Burden got very close. There's the race leader, Thomas Mazira, in the preliminary earlier on today.
So it's Mazira in front. Roger Martin is in 2nd place. Greg Walters in car number 4 holds down 3rd spot. Then we've got Burden getting back into the fray, and along with Gary Jones, and Richard Carter getting shuffled back through the field.
This is where the action seems to be in the main bunch. Race leader's already bolted. We'll see whether or not Carter, this time he's trying the inside approach to the left-hander. He's been caught very wide there. Every time he's had someone underneath him. And he hangs in here, but it's very, very loose there, as you can see.
Burden's improved 1 spot on Gary Jones, who got out wide, and the back of the Formula Ford really slipping, as you can well see. All of these cars on identical rubber. They're a racing groove tyre, prepared and built by Avon. So, rather interesting that Richard Carter would be caught so well wide so many times, particularly with a fellow who's got so much experience. This is the left-hander at Castrol. They drop down, then through this fairly tight left-hander, up the hill onto the straight, underneath our speed cam, and again Carter ducks to the inside. Jeffrey Walters leads this bunch, Andrew Burden behind, Gary Jones the man immediately in front of race cam, and then Richard Carter, who seems to be lacking just a little bit of brake horsepower at the moment.
Yeah, that's where he's losing out on the straights.
Oh, look at Burden through on the inside. There goes Walters, spins the L1 off to the outside, and it's good night car number 4. Great stuff from race cam.
There he is, trying to catch it back again and get back behind them again. That was bad luck indeed for Walters.
He's dropped about 14 places there.
Well, there's a lot of dirt and so forth on the circuit down there because of the earlier tangle, and a similar amount of dirt on the approach and the exit of Castrol.
So that would mean that Andrew Burden goes through to third position in car number 88, the Lola, that's owned by Bob Holden. This is Andrew Gupp, car number 55. He's being looked after at the moment by Pee Wee Siddle, who took Peter Brock to Le Mans last year.
Let's have a look back at the race cam as Richard Carter manages to pick up some pieces here. He was passed by 4 or 5 cars, a couple of tangled, and he's managed to find his way back into about 4th spot. There's that dirt I mentioned on the exit coming out, and Burden is the fellow 2 ahead that is running away. The race leader, of course, is Thomas Mazera in car number 5. As always, out in front and doing so beautifully in the Dalcar Industries machine. Thomas Mazera coming out of Castrol Corner.
Andrew Burden's having an up-and-down race, isn't he? Came off the front row with Mazera, got shuffled back to 6th, back up to 3rd again.
Mazera is the points leader in this series after 3 of the point scoring rounds.
There's confirmation of placings as they are on the road. Thomas Mazera leads in car number 5. Second is Martin in 28. And third place being held down by Andrew Burden.
Back at Oran Park in this round of the Formula Ford race, what you're seeing through race cam is the battle for 5th and 6th positions on the racetrack. 6th being held by our race cam driver, Richard Carter, and he's just been overtaken by David Stanley. That's him up front in car 43.
Oops. There's number 96 with some problems. That's
always was a strange address.
Mark Williamson. And his problems, he's in the pit area and out of harm's way.
So Carter pursues David Stanley. And there's been a lot of chopping and changing for position in this race. We saw Greg Walters through race cam a couple of laps back spin out and lose a lot of placings. He's now back up to 11th and doing well. And in fact, he's not far behind Carter. Things are getting interesting.
Well, actually, the car just in front of Carter has been really all over the road, and behind Carter, they're all at 6s and 7s. So we'll show you that as the race unfolds. There's 88 Andrew Burden, sat on the front row of the grid, of course, with Thomas Mazera. Mazera with a 46.1 and Burden with a 46.3.
Burden's now pulled away just a little bit as we take race cam once again, and it's Alan Bissett from Melbourne who's come through on Richard Carter. So the Melburnian who works for Ronnie Harrop down at his workshops there is doing extremely well, and Richard Carter's going backwards at a great rate of knots with race cam at present. Dave Stanley's gone through. You can see Bissett disappearing into the distance across the top. It's great stuff there as they go left to right, down through the left-hander at Castrol. Dave Stanley's pulled away, and Andrew Burden, as I said before, has pulled well away in car number 88. Well, this is extraordinary stuff.
It really is tremendous pictures coming out of our race cam unit, set up, of course, by Dave Thomas on the Vision Graphics machine, driven by Richard Carter. Carter's been very loose indeed through this corner, either very wide at the exit or very wide at the entrance. And that's where most of the cars have been able to pass him. He can get into just the flow of this race. The other cars aren't running away from him. He's put together a couple of very, very tidy laps now, and he's staying with them. Just notice how the cars move over the top of the flip-flop and the run down, of course, now to Castrol Corner.
The car gets extremely light on that part of the course. This is sensational to sit here and watch exactly what's going on. We're looking at the back of Alan Bissett's car, noting some of the mistakes that are being made, looking at the kind of horsepower advantage he's got, and just look at the car disappear on the brakes. To the left-hander at Pepsi. Bissett a little bit wider than perhaps he'd like. Now he gets the back out sideways, picks a reasonable apex on the turn, and you can see that it puts him slightly better positioned than Richard Carter.
Answer me one question, Neil. Why is it on almost alternate laps Carter takes the wide line down the main straight on one occasion, next time he takes the inside line?
I suspect that for some unusual reason he's got a fixation in his mind that as you come out of that left-hander at Pepsi, he wants to be on the inside of the course when you go through the right-hander across the rise, figuring perhaps he can sneak through. But look here at Bissett again as he gets sideways. So, but I mean, you know, it's any man's theory as to exactly what he's doing, but it's obvious at the present time that it's not working for him. You can see the pit boards there on the right-hand side of the Armco railing.
He's out wide this time.
It's just unusual that well, this time you can see he's got the front left hand into the gutter. He's picked an apex, and he's on the right side of the course here. And it looks better. So I don't know, Wilco. It's
no,
unusual.
I've got no idea either.
The thing I like is coming up to this part of the racetrack when they come up to the flip-flop, and you'll just notice this as they go to the right and to the left. See the cars in front, the way they twitch as they go over there and drop down into Castrol. They pass a car on the way through. Carter's caught one out, one back here. As they come onto the race straight away, of course, the race leader is still Thomas Mazera in car number 5. And Mazera has been able to run right away with this race, and in fact there he is at the moment. And he has really been the model of consistency in Formula Fords this season.
He has taken every pole position at each of the rounds so far, not only in this series but also in the Coca-Cola series at Amaru Park, and has won each of the races so far in the 5 rounds, so you can't do any better than that.
I like neatness. And he's got neatness tapped. They come out of Castrol corner, back onto the straight, and there you can see the gap that Mazera has opened up over the rest of the field.
It's so good, he is so good, rather, that you almost don't do him justice. You tend to be looking elsewhere for action on the track, and he's just beetling along in front, cool, calm and collected, and overlooked sometimes.
He's got almost an entire straight length gap over Roger Martin in car 28, the second man. But Martin will have to be careful that he doesn't fall foul to Andrew Burden in car number 88. But I was really keeping my fingers crossed for a great heat in this afternoon's round of the Formula Ford Driver to Europe Series, because earlier on they had a monumental battle in their 5-lapper, and Burden was very close to the back of Mazera. But when it counts, he really puts the points on the board.
The series, of course, sponsored by Motorcraft, and we've followed the cars throughout Australia this year. And this fellow in particular has been just outstanding. Thomas Mazera going to win the series very, very comfortably indeed.
He's got 3 laps to go before he gets the checkered flag.
Let's check out what's happening back in the pack as we join up with Richard Carter.
Still pursuing David Stanley by the look of it.
They've been having a great scrap. 3 of them trying to get into this corner together. Stanley with the tail out again, coming out of the corner. He's closed up actually on these other couple of cars.
I think Gary Jones is wandering a little wide there as well in 77.
They've had just a super race. Coming up to Honda corner. Now we'll take them over the top of the flip-flop. Watch the car in front, the way it just twitches.
Watch the way it dives out of the way.
Yes. They ran up on a slower car, or 2 of them actually. One the inside, one the outside. He's throwing plenty. Coming down the straight with 2 laps remaining. Thomas Mazera still well and truly out in front. We'll go back to Mazera shortly, but we've been involved in this scrap, this amazing scrap between these 4 cars.
Actually, Carter locked a brake up. Then you notice the front of the car jittering around under brakes, and you hear a little squeal in the background. And there goes Barry Ward on the inside in car number 20. That's the car that Bruce Connolly used in the Formula Ford Driver to Europe Series a season or 2 back, a Galloway. So he's really letting them all through.
That puts Carter back into 8th place. 1 lap remaining, meantime, for race leader Thomas Mazera. As these cars come around Castrol corner onto the main straight.
And there's a lot of them together this time. They head down the straight. They're now taking the signal with 1 lap to go, and they are all just side by side coming to the left-hander. Just look at the approaches, the 4 different lines at this corner. Carter goes in and under. There's one almost looped in front of him. 20 has almost lost it, and Carter gets out of the way. Joins in for the tailgating procession back onto the short circuit.
You can just about see the shims in the gearbox of this thing. We're so close.
Last corner coming up, and as they come out of the bend, coming down to take the checkered flag, it's going to be Thomas Mazera. Mr. Consistency takes the Motorcraft Formula Ford Driver to Europe Series here today.
Roger Martin second, car number 28.
Andrew Burton, I think, is going to cross the line in 88 in 3rd place. There's Mazera acknowledging the crowds, as he's done so often this season, victorious yet again in a division of the Formula Ford Driver to Europe Series, and in fact that's probably where he's going to be headed at the end of the season. And let's hope he can pick up a few good drives in Europe, because the young man has an awful lot of talent, and it would be good to see him display it and get recognition in the right quarter, because I think safe to say he's running out of opposition in this category here in Australia. Thomas Mazera, car number 5, is the winner. 2nd place getter in car 28, Roger Martin, and 3rd to car 88, Andrew Burden.
Oran Park today, we've got another round of the Goodyear Car Owners Club Laser Series, a series which has provided plenty of rough and tumble action this season. David Brabham can testify to that, but Budgie, you've done some damage to yourself yesterday in qualifying.
Yeah, I was going down the main straight towards the kink, and I thought I might brake a little bit late here, and I tried it, but unfortunately it didn't work.
Bit of a change to do the damage to yourself rather than have someone else do it to you, because it has been a bit rough at times this series.
Yeah, it's been pretty rough. It was my own fault. I can't blame anyone. It's just driver error.
The odd part about it is that Mark Gibbs, who's been a leading protagonist in the series so far, did exactly the same thing in exactly the same place.
Yeah, we're all trying out there, and well, we just made a mistake, that's all.
You've come from nowhere, basically, in this series at the start of the season to be now in 5th place overall. It was pretty hectic at Amaru Park last week.
Yeah, the Solitine car went really well. I had a bit of pressure from Mark in the first race. And then the second race, I tried too hard again and went off the track, as some people might know.
Cross country didn't get you anywhere, though, did it?
No, I dropped a place, but I got that one back.
David, Jeff and Gary are carrying the Brabham flag overseas at the moment. How come they can't keep you down on the farm at Wagga? What makes you want to go racing as well?
Well, I've asked that question many times, but I can't really say. It's just in the blood, I think.
All right, David Brabham, they're working frantically to get the car repaired. Whether or not we see it on the grid this afternoon remains to be seen. Here's Mike Raymond.
Thank you, Gary Wilkinson. Well, the driver that the Australian Touring Car Championship gains today was a familiar face during the running of the 1984 series, and I refer to Queensland's Greg Hansford, who was out of a Mazda but guest driving an Alfa Romeo, and a new experience.
It certainly is. It's very, very different from what I've been used to driving as far as the Mazda goes, and the last 6 months I've just been driving a rally car.
We don't see that much of you, and yet your career shows us that you're a very, very formidable touring car driver. Now, I realise you've had the problems with the Mazda this year. Obviously, you'd like to be doing a little more touring car racing.
I'd like to be driving a touring car every weekend if it was possible, because if you're sitting around and watching them on TV, you're not gaining any experience, and while the other guys are driving every weekend, I'm just getting further behind. So it's great to get in a car and have a drive, and just to keep feel with what's happening.
The first thoughts of the laps around here in the Alfa compared to the Mazda?
Very different. While watching the last races on television, thinking to myself, well, these guys are really trying hard, and it looks like the competition is really fierce. And when you get in the car and drive it, you've got to drive at 10/10ths in the Group A car to get anywhere. Like if you have half a sleep for a quarter of a second on a lap, well, you get passed by 20 cars.
Well, you're young and you're fit, and the race is long enough today. That might be able to overcome a few of the other problems.
Well, I hope so, but the gym I joined 3 months ago went broke, so I'll have to start doing something else.
Wish you all the best, and it's good to have you back with the circus today.
Thank you, it's good to be back.
Greg Hansford, of course, one of the drivers that we'll be watching during the running of the Australian Touring Car Championship. In the meantime, it's back to Neil Crompton.
Thank you, Mike. And the cars there on the grid standing by for our next round of the Ford Laser Series. Before we take a look at that, we'll take you back to the last Formula Ford race where we had a bit of action. Looking through the eyes of race cam once again, and Richard Carter through the left-hander across the back and right behind Barry Ward. The two of them had what you'll see is a little bit of a dust-up. How close can you get? Whoops. Richard just overcooks it. Gary Jones goes round and round. Evasive action takes him out into the dirt. Shoo, and backs up the road.
Well, actually, he handled that well, Neil, because he had the car spin in front of him.
Dave Thomas had a heart attack.
Yes, I bet he did. Race came after surviving 2 Formula Ford races. Meantime, the officials are just doing a little bit of sweeping up on the track on the entrance and exit to Pepsi Corner. And our next event, Neil, of course, is the Goodyear Car Owners Club Ford Laser Series, and a strong field here today too.
Yes, a great field, round 8, and the racing's been close. You can see there the side of the car's looking pretty bent and broken, and that indicates just how close they've been. Let's have a look at the way that they'll line up for this particular event, 8 laps in total. On the front row of the grid, Peter Dane with a time of 1:31.1. Alongside him in a borrowed car is Mark Gibbs. The second row consists of Ken Douglas, who shares the series lead at the moment, and alongside him is Steve Williams. The third row, Richard Moore, car number 9, and from Gosford, Mark Scaife. Behind him, we've got Bernie Hanley and John Lusty. The next row consisting of John Clinton and Alexander, and then rounding out the top dozen, John Giddings and Tony Nicastri.
And there have been a couple of changes to the grid after the preliminary this morning. Of course, with young Brabham with some problems, but good to see him working all night and hopefully lining up here this afternoon. It's been quite a rush for young David Brabham. There's the cars being gridded up at the moment. As I said, the officials just clearing off a little of the dust and so forth. Just making sure that the track is clean, and they'll let them away on their parade lap, and then we'll have them around here at the start-finishing line. There you can see one of the vehicles that didn't make it, 41, returning to the pit area, and the lasers are underway at the moment. As we mentioned before, a very big crowd in attendance here today at Sydney's Oran Park Raceway. I'd like to say hello to all our viewers on the 7 network, and also a special hello to our viewers today in Tasmania and also throughout northern Queensland, up in the Lismore region as well. So we've got our full national telecast today, bringing the action from Sydney's Oran Park. The organisers of the meeting must be delighted. Biggest turnout of people they've seen here in quite a number of years. And as far as a telecast is concerned, you couldn't possibly wish for a closer race to follow the Australian Touring Car Championship after qualifying yesterday.
I certainly haven't seen a bigger crowd here in 10 years anyway.
No, very good for them. And the people, of course, the Oran Park Raceway has changed ownership. Leppington Pastoral Company, Tony Perich, has done a magnificent job here at this circuit. It is just so clean, and the place looks a picture. They've done a lot of work. They've spent a lot of money on the racetrack, and they deserve all the success in the world. And they're presenting some good racing here today, and we hope it goes well for them. And also the Endurance Championship round, which of course is the Pepsi 250 that comes up around about the middle of August, following our telecast of the opening round of the Endurance Championship from Sydney's Amaru Park Raceway, and that'll be the first Sunday in August.
Well, they got their priorities right here, Mike. The first thing they did was to get the surface of the racetrack in better shape. In fact, it's in top shape now, to keep the competitors happy. They're keen to come here and race. And gradually there's improvement being made now in spectator facilities here to keep the paying customer through the gate in good shape. There's Mark Gibbs, and that's a borrowed car that he's got, because I spoke to David Brabham a short time ago, as you probably heard. He wasn't the only one that tried a tricky braking manoeuvre through the kink at the end of the main straight and hit the wall yesterday. Gibbs did exactly the same thing and wasn't able to get his car back in shape for today's race, so he's driving a borrowed car.
He made a real mess of his car as we look there at Peter Dane, car number 41, who at present supposedly shares the series lead with Ken Douglas. Mark Gibbs in third with 47 points. Mark Scaife has 42. There's Ken Douglas.
Bit of a ding-dong over this business of who's in front in the series.
Yeah, it's getting a bit ridiculous, actually, Gary. The 3 different parties involved in this are all saying different things. And frankly, I'm getting a little bit annoyed at all the different stories emanating about point scores in this series. But anyway, 1 minute has been sounded. We forget the point scores and look forward to some great racing.
Yeah, who's going to be top dog on the day? That's all I want to know.
Well, it's been a very good series, the Goodyear Car Owners Club Lacer Series, supported by Cheviot Wheels, by Valvoline, by Wiley, and obviously the major sponsor being Goodyear. Put a lot of cars on the racetrack, and they've lost a couple of cars too, let me tell you. So we're ready for the start.
Williams and Douglas on the second row there. Dane and Gibbs on the front row. The last time they were here at Oran Park, it was a great old dust-up.
Williams was very much out of luck, as was Douglas at Amaru at the last round of this series. Set to go. Flag is down. Away they go off the front row. Peter Dane and Mark Gibbs side by side. Dane might have it. He's got the inside running. Puts his foot down. Yes, he has. And he's going to lead them down towards the first corner with Mark Gibbs in close pursuit. Ken Douglas not making the best of the start, getting shuffled back just a little off the second row.
This will be a great first corner.
There's Douglas, though. He's held his line there into the first corner and will go round in third spot.
Oh! I was going to say brain fade, brake fade.
Phil Alexander.
Wasn't his fault. Oh, there's one upside down.
Oh, almost. Miracle, Gary Cook.
Skater's waltz.
Oh, goodness me. All 4 wheels off the ground there. And he's come down right side up.
We'll have a look at that again. 13, I think, or 31 that finished up going straight in backwards.
31 into the wall. Watch out for Gary Cook, though, in 77.
Put more than live music into that. So he survived the first corner.
Oh,
now, meantime, have a look at this.
Douglas.
Bit of our rallycross from Oran Park.
Oh,
you wouldn't believe it. The track is as smooth as anything. However, they're all finding different lines through these corners.
Behind Douglas, we've got Mork in car number 9, and right behind him, Williams in the orange and white car. And here's the leader, car number 41, Peter Dane. He can look and laugh in his rear vision mirror. Big problems with these cars. When you push them too hard, they tend to understeer. You get out in the boondocks and you've got all sorts of strife. Mark Scaife right behind Steve Williams. There's Shane Press in the blue and yellow car, another borrowed car this weekend. You remember last weekend he tore the front off his.
He'll lead coming down to Pepsi corner again. And as they come down here, let's take a look at some of the action that we caught in the opening lap of this race.
This is Gary Cook.
I thought he was gone.
So did I. Look at this. Up on 2, down again.
We could probably have him in the stunt team at Bathurst, up and down pit straight on 2 wheels.
Well, he managed to get out of that. That car was almost completely over. But there you can see the way they spread themselves out as they go on to the Grand Prix course, heading down to Bitchapave Corner through that right-hander, and they make the run, of course, up towards the bridge. The spectators being treated to some thrills and some spills here today. Coming over the bridge,
Gibbs still behind Peter Dane, Ken Douglas third, Steve Williams behind him, Richard Mork, Mark Scaife.
Was he just joining in or what down there?
Yes, I think that could be Alexander, actually, that's got it out of the concrete down there. Let's go back to the race leader, though. He's doing it comfortably.
Using every bit of the road once again.
But I think he could be under a little bit of pressure here in the next half lap of the race.
Oh, Gibbs knows how to apply the pressure, too. The man running in second place in car 35.
To Castrol again, the Westline forward entry, car number 41 with Peter Dane coming out of that bend using the full width of the racetrack, hard up against the wall.
Look at Steve Williams and Richard Mork side by side, just behind Kenny Douglas. Williams gets the better of this one, and Mark Scaife up there as well in car number 3.
6 laps still remain in this Goodyear Car Owners Club laser round at Oran Park. Cars get a little bit on the light side.
Mark Scaife last weekend spent some time in Ken Douglas's door.
Scaife going through. Oh, he said it's wide enough. Well, the track depends how much you want to use of it. So he ducks in behind here again.
A real battle royal here between Scaife and Williams.
He's managed to keep it clean so far, but only just. Oh, look at this. Williams is not real happy about it by the look of it.
Saying, if you want to get by me, son, go around the outside.
Well, they go over the Goodyear Bridge, and this scrap still continues. They are very close indeed.
Oh, he's at it again. Behind them, Richard Mork in car number 9. There's going to be something happen here for sure in the next 60 seconds. You get that feeling, don't you? Sitting on the edge of the chair. Williams gets right out onto the edge of the tarmac. Here's Shane Press in the background in the blue and yellow car. And here comes Mark Scaife again. A little tap up the backside, thank you.
It was only a small tap. But when they come out of Castrol Corner, well, watch for the drag down the front straight. You'll sit right in behind him and then hopefully pull out on the inside under brakes. That's what he attempted the last time. Almost frightened the dickens out of the fellow in front of him.
Well, he should be well positioned here. The advantage of the toe. Mark should duck to the inside.
He does, but
no. Williams has got it covered.
Time to cover the tracks, boys. He's not going around the outside, I'll tell you that. He's managed to shake him just a little bit through that corner as they go beneath the Goodyear Bridge. Coming down to the next right-hander, which of course is at Volvo Corner. Then the short run to the straight, and the next right-hander after that, of course, is at Bitchapave.
All of these cars on identical Goodyear radials. So nobody has any great advantage with rubber. But there's lots of different tyre pressures being run, and there's all kinds of different engine settings, although the engines themselves are standard.
This has been the scrap of the race so far.
Yeah, supposedly standard. It's been the odd rocket appear at a couple of these rounds.
It's amazing how when you say the odd rocket does appear, how quickly the other entrants get very quickly onto the bandwagon and the rocket disappears again.
Here's a go, here's a go, here's a go.
This is not the place to pass.
Oh, nearly launched himself into the side of Williams' car there.
Terrific stuff, he said. If we could get the car handling, it'll be better.
Well, they usually handle much better on 4 wheels than 2. Look at this.
Look at this.
Hello, Mark. Yeah, good to see you, Steve. Terrific.
So we're having a great race here, fellas. Wonder if they're enjoying it on television. Or I wonder, can the stewards see what we're doing? With about 9 cameras, they can't miss. This is it, the moment of truth. Down to Pepsi corner. The brakes hard on. Lock the wheels up. Square the tyres. Almost down to the wheels. And the run down once again to Volvo.
They're still at it.
All they've done is point at each other.
We'll have to keep the camera on these 2 guys after the race is over. I want to see what happens when the fight really starts.
Sensational watching Mark here because he's saying plenty along the way. It's good value. The leader still has a little more than 4 laps remaining. There's Ken Douglas, joint series leader, Mark Scaife, Steve Williams. The rest of them you can just about forget at the moment. Well, and I think Scaife might have just pulled a little bit of a gap finally.
We've seen very little of David Brabham after going to all that trouble and expense to get that car repaired to run today. It didn't survive too long and he's off the track, out of the race.
The man we're watching, incidentally, is in 4th position. There's 3rd, Kenny Douglas, and still being led by Peter Dane and Mark Gibbs. Well, it's a little bit tidier down to the left-hander at Castrol this time for Mark Scaife. Car looking surprisingly straight, really, when you look at some of the other cars out there at the moment. He's only a young fella, this bloke, but he's got a lot of talent. Let's have a look at the leader, though. Peter Dane, he's been doing very well in this one. Car number 41 at the end of the main straight. And as I said before, looking and laughing in his rear-view mirror. Mark Gibbs, though, keeping him honest all the way. Car number 35, the borrowed entry.
Hasn't been able to apply the same sort of pressure to Dane that Scaife was able to put on Williams, though.
Just as well.
2.5 laps, or 2 3/4 laps remaining for the leaders.
News also comes through that car number 9, Richard Mork, has dropped out of proceedings.
Dane we follow on the approach to the bridge over the top of there.
Well, I reckon if there's one bloke sitting back at the moment watching the coverage and enjoying it, it would have to be Jimmy Zerafos, who decided halfway through this series to bail because it was too expensive. I think he made a pretty smart decision.
It's great to see the corporate sponsorship because it is a very, very rich series.
It's a tremendous series and it really gives encouragement. Relatively equal cars and big money up for grabs in both a national and a state series. And here's 2nd, Mark Gibbs, the man who's given us some exciting television so far this year.
Followed the cars through some of the rounds, of course. Interesting ones at Amaru Park. Some of those have been car destroyers. And, of course, I'll never forget the one at Keilor early in the season. 2 laps remaining.
Well, Gibbs was in the thick of things there too, wasn't he? He's a driver that's always been able to plonk himself right in the centre of things.
Is Richard Mork. Not looking very happy about everything. At least the car's straight. Gives a go.
$1,500 is the round prize money for a win, and $1,300 for 2nd, $1,000 for 3rd, and overall in the series $3,000 for 1st, $2,600 for 2nd, $2,200 for 3rd. It's pretty good money.
I could get aggressive for that kind of money.
Put on a horse.
There's $80,000 up in total prize money in this series.
Be careful, I'll put the mark of Zorro on you.
Touching me with that gay blade.
West line forward, number 41 comes across the bridge, and he is leading this and doing it very, very nicely indeed. Good race, still smiling, is Dane. Comes around onto the back part of the course, and $1,500 looks like it might go his way here this afternoon at Oran Park.
There's also another $2,000 for the most outstanding find of the series as well. So Goodyear at Motorcraft, Wiley and all of the other people who've been involved in this series have put up some great money.
Coming down now to take
the flag or the signal with 1 lap remaining, and that gap opening all the time.
The other people involved in this series are Cheviot alloy wheels and also Wiley shock absorbers, Valvoline oil. Confederation of Australian Motorsport and Bruce Keys, in fact, helped to put together this entire series at the start of the year. Top marks to everybody concerned.
Yes, I think it's a series that will probably grow each year.
Oh, Clinton's car.
It doesn't look the happiest, does it? So Dane coming through Volvo on the run down now to the right-hander at Bitchapave and then up over the Goodyear Bridge. He can keep this at the rate he's been running. Oh, 1 upside down, 2 in together, 38. And that's John Giddings, who has taken a ride down there. Any chance he had of finishing the series with a straight car just flew out the window. So John Giddings turns the ignition off, of course, and walks across to the infield after getting it upside down. Says, what do you have to do? So 38 exits the field.
Yeah, well, that was quite incredible. There's the leader, Peter Dane. Checkered flag being prepared for him now. Just 1 round remaining in this series, and Peter Dane will take victory in round 8 of the Goodyear Ford Laser Series. Second placing, of course, goes to Mark Gibbs. A great performance from the top 2 drivers. The rest of them have been involved in a fair bit of elbow bashing. Let's take a look now at a replay of that earlier action. Down to the left-hander. And
oh, he's got...
It's Giddings in car number 38.
Oh, right in the door. He has got sent on his way.
Hasn't he ever? And also car number 8 there as well. And that was John Lusty from Victoria. So they were certainly ducking left, right and centre. There'll be some discussions, I'm sure, after this particular meeting in the Ford Laser Series.
Well, I would think the stewards of the meeting would also be wanting to have a look at it. The director is going to run this again for us, just to see whether or not he actually gets poked right in the door. Here comes the challenge up on the inside. Bang, straight in the back wheel. And that has thrown him off. The front comes over, catches the ripple strip, and he's got no chance at all of trying to get it down. 1 laser off the beam. And it's the driver of car number 19.
And that's Bernie Hanley.
Bernie.
Bernie's in there.
So Bernie has had some sort of a problem, run into Giddings in car number 38 and upside down, and 1 Ford Laser certainly takes the test there, with 8 and a few of the others sliding in and managing to get the brakes on very, very quickly indeed. So John Giddings is in fact a very lucky driver. And back it comes to terra firma. We've seen plenty of action in the Goodyear Car Owners Club Laser Series. There's a little of the aftermath that followed Giddings getting upside down in car number 38. So the race leader coming across is Dane. Let's recap the placings for you now. Dane, the winner, and a good drive too. Second spot goes to Gibbs, and third place goes to Kenny Douglas.
The most pleasing thing about today's round of the Goodyear Car Owners Club Ford Laser Series here at Oran Park is that with Peter Dane winning and Ken Douglas finishing third, there'll no longer be any argument about who leads the series.
Yeah, well, we thought we were last time, but there's a little bit of conjecture on it, so we're sure of it now.
Mike Breen has a very nice trophy, and Mike Breen from Goodyear. And, of course, they've supported the series right through the season. There is 1 round to go, and quite frankly, the racing has been so tight and so keen, it could still go anybody's way.
Oh, yeah, it's still anyone's race. It has been all year. Ken got a little bit of a head start to start with, but Mark and I have both been working hard to catch him, and so we've succeeded.
Back in the field behind you were Mark Scaife this afternoon, is having a few tussles of his own, trying to claw his way up the point score, because he also is still in the thick of things too, depending on how the next round pans out.
Yeah, well, it all depends on who finishes the next round, just who's going to take home the money, but it's close enough that any one of 3 or 4 drivers can do it. So, you know,
congratulations on another fine win today. One man who is very determined indeed to finish the series and finish right up on top of the money.
is Mark Gibbs, to the point of not only banging his own car in the wall, but then borrowing somebody else's to keep going round.
Yeah, I'd have to thank Phil Alexander for that. We had a small problem yesterday with our car. Surprising with these laser drivers, everybody sort of gets out on the track and crashes into each other. As soon as we've get off the track, everybody's offering me cars yesterday afternoon, so it's really good. Thanks very much to Phil Alexander and all the guys that helped me last night. Ron Gillard, Alan Gillard, Ron Krause.
Your own car will be up and running again for Amaroo?
Oh, sure. We'll be there.
OK, look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
That's the action from the Goodyear Car Owners Club Ford laser round here today. Now, here's Mike Raymond.
Today's 10th round of the Australian Touring Car Championship is a little different. That's because Jim Richards, Peter Brock and Robbie Francevic have stolen all the pole position honours throughout the 9 rounds of the series so far. But then late yesterday, Queensland's favourite son, Dick Johnson, finally got pole position, a position he's been chasing for the entire season. But it wasn't without drama though, was it?
Mate, something comes to those who wait, and I think I've waited long enough.
Well, you couldn't wait any longer. I mean, today's the final.
That's it, isn't it? It's always at the wrong end of the year, though, isn't it?
But you must be happy. I mean, you'll be getting progressively quicker. Jim Richards' lead over the field has come back in the last couple of rounds, and you've got a car here that will seem that it'll run all day, every day.
Well, you know, we're very happy with the car. It has improved dramatically over the last 4 or 5 meetings, and this is making us look reasonably good, I'd say, for the long-distance races, which are coming up in another month.
Today's starting lineup, which sees yourself and obviously Jim Richards on the front row of the grid, and behind you now, Rob Francevic and Peter Brock. It must be a very hard pill for Peter to swallow after being given fast time yesterday early.
Well, I suppose a lot of errors have been made on previous occasions in the timing, the way they do the timing here, which is a little archaic in a lot of ways when you do have computers and things available to you. But that's just one of the things, and it always seems to happen in certain tracks, and this is one of them.
All right, what's the game plan with the start of the race only a short time away?
The same as we have every other race, and Bathurst and all the long races, just go like hell.
Well, going like hell is one thing, but Richards has been able to catch you at the other races, but you're sort of brimming with confidence about this circuit and the way this car handles.
Well, for some reason, this particular car goes extremely well around here because I think it gets out of the very slow corners. I can get the power on a lot earlier than they seem to be able to. And the tyres hang in, so we're real happy with the way everything's going for us.
Well, I wish you all the best today.
Mate, I tell you what, we'll try to get at least one win up.
Dick Johnson, of course, who sits on pole for the 10th round of the Touring Car Championship. It's a different story, though, for Jim Richards. He's been dominating the series since round 1.
Jim Richards couldn't have started the Touring Car Championship on a better note. He won pole position at the Winton Opener and then proceeded to distance himself from the field, winning comfortably from BMW teammate Neville Crichton and Kevin Bartlett in Astarion. Round 2 at Sandown, and Peter Brock sat the new Mobile Commodore on pole and proceeded to run away with the race. Richards closed dramatically, but the hometown hoedown went to Commodore over BMW and Dick Johnson third in the Mustang. The third chapter drifted away from the BMW script at Symonds Plains in Tasmania. Kiwi Robbie Francevic and his silver turbo Volvo won hands down. Johnson trailed throughout in the Mustang, while Richards dropped to 5th after gearbox selection problems. Fortunately, Crichton finished third in the second BMW, and the leaderboard still showed Richards 4 points ahead of Crichton, a further 4 back to Jones, and then Johnson and Brock squabbling for the minors. Round 4 was at Wanneroo in Western Australia, and Richards was back on top of it. He rocketed to the front and wasn't sighted after that. Brock was never in danger of losing second, and Johnson turned in a blinder for third after dropping out to last. Jones, Slako and Crichton threw interest into the race with their monumental scrap, but Jim was home in a canter. The halfway point in the series was reached at Adelaide International Raceway, where a brilliant start by Crichton threw the game plan out for a few laps. Brocky led the parade from Johnson, but the signs were ominous. Richard punted the black 62 machine through the field to collar Brock and run in the undisturbed air. Brock was an easy second, with Johnson again bound for another third. Round 6 in Keilor Raceway was the battle scene in more ways than one. Richards made a horror start and was quickly shuffled back behind Brock, Masterton, Johnson and Francevic. The Volvo charged to second as Brocky dropped the Commodore on the flight path, and the fun was just beginning. Francevic defied everyone to pass him, but Richards finally did to lead to the flag over Johnson and Crichton, who redesigned a couple of the corners on the way. Round 7 was at Surfers Paradise, and Richards knew a good start was imperative. He got away side by side with Brock, but within half a lap was in front and running away. Surface produced 4 seasons of weather in 1 hour, but it didn't bother the BMW pilot. Francevic played it cool till mid-distance and then charged at the black 62 machine. Brock held 3rd and Johnson 4th at the flag, giving Richards an even firmer hold on the title. Round 8 of the championship was held at the Lakeside International Raceway near Brisbane. And while series leader Jim Richards had pole position, the split over the rest of the field was the closest of the championship so far. Queensland's Dick Johnson was 1/10 of a second slower than the BMW, but at the start Johnson got a blinder, coming off the line sideways to head Larry Perkins, Peter Brock and Neville Crichton, and Richards, who quickly picked up the pieces after a terrible start. Lord Jim took only a couple of laps to take care of the mobile Commodores. Brock was first with an inside shuffle at the carousel, and Perkins was next for the go-by as the Bavarian beast started in full cry after Johnson's green Mustang. The scrap between Johnson and Richards was the highlight of the race. When Dick found himself a metre offline in the downhill run to Hungry Corner, Richards was through for the lead. With Richards in front, most of the interest centred on the dice developing between Kiwi Robbie Francevic and the Turbo Volvo and Peter Brock's Commodore. Brock's laid-back style of driving with one arm out the window hasn't been detected this season. In fact, he's been far too busy with both hands on the wheel. In the final few laps of the race, Johnson made a late charge at Richards, but Jim had Lakeside tap, and he went on to win over Johnson with Brock 3rd and Francevic a fine 4th. Round 9 of the championship, and a good field was on hand at Sydney's Amaru Park Raceway. In quite a surprise, Colin Bond in the Nimble Alpha and Dick Johnson in the Mustang both out-qualified the BMWs, putting plenty of pressure on Richards. At the start, the Alpha was away cleanly, but Johnson's Mustang had too much grunt as they climbed the hill, and Francevic was also in the charge for the lead as they crested Skyline and dropped into the loop for the first time. The break was all Johnson needed to give him breathing space, for he knew it wouldn't be long before that black BMW was on his bumper again. Richards dealt with Brock and then started on hauling in Francevic, whose car was slowly catching the green Mustang. Jim finally took second from the Volvo driver, and the charge for the lead was on. Lap after lap, he pulled back the deficit, and when Johnson found himself a metre offline on the back part of the course, you know who found himself as leader of the pack. If there was a star performer in the race outside of Richards, it had to be Tony Longhurst in the BMW 323. After dealing with some of the fancied contenders, he zeroed in on Peter Brock's Commodore and began to look seriously at 3rd place. Longhurst's pass on Brock came as they approached Dunlop Loop. He slipped in and under quicker than you could blink an eye or even turn on your headlights. With laps running out, Richards kept up the pace, but giant killer Longhurst was closing on Johnson at such a rate, BMW team chief Frank Gardner almost smiled. In the run to the flag, Richards made it his 7th win in 9 rounds. He crossed clear of Johnson and no baloney Tony, with 4th going to Brock. The leaderboard now shows Richards unbeatable on 213 to Johnson's 169. Neville Crichton 3rd on 149. Brock is next on 143. The absent Alan Jones on 117. And Robbie Francevic 115 as the scene is set for the Castrol Grand Final here at Oran Park this afternoon.
The Lloyd's Trophy, that's the symbol of achievement in Australian touring car racing. And today, after 20,000 kilometres travelling across Australia, spending $150,000 and fighting for 7 victories, Jim Richards and the JPS team finally get their chance to lay claim to this trophy. But what is it that lures drivers and teams to chase this title?
Well, for better or worse, it's Australia's premier event to start with. If there's any commercial connotations, you have to be in the marketplace. And the Australian Touring Car Championship is the marketplace for drivers, abilities, motor cars, development, products. It's the whole thing. It's a televised, press-followed, public-followed, prestigious event. You cannot, if you're in motor racing, afford to be away from it.
When the Australian Touring Car Championship kicked off in 1960, Australian motorsport gave birth to what was to become the most popular form of motorsport for the following 25 years. Aussie fans have cheered and jeered their heroes ever since David Mackay punted the old 3.4 Jaguar. The subsequent roll call of winners covers a quarter century of motorsport's household names: Jane, Gagan, Beechey, Bond, Brock, Morris and Johnson. The big winner in the Brand Stakes is Ford with 12 touring car crowns, kicking off in '64 when Big Pete Gagan initiated a winning streak of 5 titles, a record that still stands today. The master of the single sprint race, Pete, and the lurching Mustang remain as fond but misty memories 2 decades later. Keeping the V8 Henrys to the forefront in the following years were an aggressive but exciting Alan Moffat, whose Coca-Cola Trans Am Mustang rocked fans with its looks and speed, and the laid-back Queenslander Dick Johnson, the endearing underdog, whose title count stands at 3. For the general, business has also been pretty good. Storman Norm Beachy gave the Lion a chance to roar in '69 in the Sherman Arrow, 1 year after the Touring Car Championship became a series. Bob Jane then added to his previous 2 victories with another 2 in the early '70s at a time when Moffat, Gagan and Jane drew more spectators than any other sports heroes. In '75, Colin Bond picked up his only Touring Car Championship in the SLR 5000, 12 months after Peter Brock started his rise to the top with 3 titles in the Tirana XU1, A9X and V8 Commodore, and Sydney's Bob Morris rounds out the 5 drivers to give General Motors their impressive 8 wins. The Big Cat Jaguar also pounced on 4 touring car titles back in the early '60s with Mackay, Pitt and Jane. And Alan Moffat had a controversial win in the Mazda RX-7 back in 1983, giving Japanese car its first victory. So today, the 37-year-old expatriate Kiwi Jim Richards adds another name, another brand to the list. For the 3 times Bathurst winner, it's just reward for 10 years very hard work.
And thank you, Neil Crompton. Very nice piece indeed of the history of the Australian Touring Car Championship. Let's take a look at the way they line up for the Castrol Grand Final. From position 1, car 17, Queensland's Dick Johnson. From 262 is Jim Richards in the BMW. From 3, car 5, Peter Brock in the Commodore. From 421, Rob Francevic in the Volvo. From 5, car 3, Kent Bagent in the BMW. From 6.2, Steve Masterton in the Commodore. From 7.31, Neville Crichton in the BMW. From 8.77, Peter Williamson, a surprise in the Toyota. From 9.26, Colin Bond in the Alpha. From 10, car 12, Wilmington in the Jaguar. From 11.23, Tony Longhurst in the BMW, and rounding out the 12.96, Tim Slaker all the way from Western Australia. 10 seconds away from the start of the Castrol Grand Final at Oran Park Raceway, Sydney. And they're off, and Johnson, no, Brock has split them. Heading down the front straight away, and Peter Brock gets away. Johnson hasn't got off to a good one. Now he comes back. Masterton coming in with the muscle, and Richards slips up here on the inside with Francevic already up into second, and Johnson down on the inside of Jim Richards and takes him too. So Johnson comes up running in 3rd, but it'll be Peter Brock. Just look at the gaggle of cars as they come through that corner, go beneath the Goodyear Bridge and head down now to Volvo. Brocky will lead it. Had pole position taken away from him. Francevic is in 2nd, 3rd is Johnson, 4th is Jim Richards, and 5th, a blinder from Peter Williamson.
Not only a blinder from Peter Williamson, Tim Slaker is in 6th spot, coming off 12th position on the grid.
The tyres will not be warm, would you agree, Neil Crompton, for a lap or so as they go over the Goodyear Bridge. And the crowd coming alive here as Brocky in the 0.5 leads. Francevic doing a little dance across the racetrack, and Johnson zeroed right in behind him.
No, I was just outside before, Michael, and it is very, very cold out there. It'll take some time to get heat into the tyres, but look now as Dick Johnson goes underneath Robbie Francevic. He's poking and prodding and looking for a way through, but impressive is Pete Williamson. That's incredible in car number 77.
Knows the track well. Castrol corner again. Brocky will lead them across the strike. Robbie Francevic looking good at this stage. Watch the speed of Francevic's Volvo as Johnson tailgates now down Oran Park's front straight away. Sitting in 3rd, and right behind him is Jim Richards, ready to pounce already. To the left-hander, they come down to Pepsi corner. There's Kiwi Rob trying to keep the machine at least straight under brakes. Johnson, the next one, followed by Richards, and back behind Richards is Peter Williamson, a blinder, Slako, Masterton being the next one through.
Tell you what, when he does keep that Volvo in a straight line, does it not fly?
And hasn't he caught Brock in only a lap and a half? Johnson's up to keep them very, very honest, but you'll find the next time down the front straight just how many horses the Brock 05 Mobile Commodore has. Here they come across the bridge. The cars stream through there, including Tim Slako, Neville Crichton going through as well. They've cleared out from the main bunch. But this is where Francevic should have Johnson on his tailpipe as they come up towards Yamaha corner. And Johnson's car is very, very quick indeed from this point of the racetrack through the lefts and the rights.
Superior handling of the Mustang here should close the gap, as Mike Raymond suggests, on Robbie Francevic in the Volvo. And he's got to close up here because it was pretty noticeable on the last lap, and we'll watch it again here, that on the straight, Francevic does have the legs on Johnson's car.
Well, this is where Francevic should be able to put some pressure on Peter Brock. He's fairly close to Brock now. He's going to swing to the outside and make the super leap right down the outside in the Castrol Volvo, but Brock says, no way, fight for it. Brock back in front again, and the front end dancing around a little there under brakes. Francevic close enough to pounce. Johnson's joined them for a three-way tailgate, and Richards is there, making it a four-sided run for the lead. Williamson back in fifth, and here comes Robbie. Well, thought about it anyway, but he's close enough now to maybe out-drag Brock down the front straight the next time round.
Only place he's ever going to get past Brock is on that front straight, I would think. I don't know that the Volvo's got the handling to get by on the back part of the course, and Brock's pretty determined to hold him out, doesn't matter where.
Once again, they go over the Goodyear Bridge and come into the next turn. Brock a little sideways. Here's Johnson. Johnson's quick through here. Francevic getting a little closer to the 0.5. And how close is Johnson? Johnson might sit in behind Francevic unless he's a bit too taily. And that's as taily as you can get when you've got a Mustang. And Richards saying, we've had enough of this. I want to get on with the lead. Over the flip-flop, Brock in 0.5 for the Mobile Commodore team, and looking good at this stage. Trouble at Amaru, didn't look comfortable, looks much better here today. In second is Francevic, all over him. Then Dick Johnson and Peter Williamson sitting in behind Jim Richards. Now is the chance for Francevic as he pulls out, going down the front straight. Brock can't do much about it. He can't race him in unless he tries to tuck him here on the inside. Now on the brakes with the Volvo. Will it stop? And will it turn? Yes, it does. And Robbie Francevic of New Zealand goes through in the silver turbo Volvo to take the lead in the 10th round of the Australian Touring Car Championship. Brock is second. Third is Johnson. Richards fourth.
Well, now, can Brock sustain, or withstand, rather, the pressure that Dick Johnson is going to try and apply? Francevic in front. Why, gee, that little orange car of Williamson's is still poking right in there for an under 3-litre car. Yeah. He's really done something amazing with it since we last saw it.
Well, he's rebuilt the engine, of course, since the demise of the car in practice for last weekend's Amaru meeting. They've done a lot of changes to the suspension on the car. They've improved at no end, and Willow's absolutely flying. He said to me yesterday, by gee, it feels good in the warm-up, and it certainly has come good. 2.8-litre, 6-cylinder, fuel-injected Toyota Supra, and it's flying.
But the four biggest names of touring car racing in Australia for 85 are on the track in front of him, and everybody else is nowhere.
Look for them as they come out of the bend, and here is Dick Johnson in behind Peter Brock. Brock running in second. I think he might have the legs on the Mustang down the straight. Richards pretty close to those two, and Johnson's only chance here is perhaps on the run off the bridge. The car is very quick indeed there, and if Brock holds the cars of Johnson and Richards up, Francevic is going to have a break, and a good break over the rest of the field.
Yeah, Brock's got more horsepower than Dick Johnson, but Johnson's car handles and brakes so very well that he'll be all over the back of him around this back part of the course. And yes, indeed, Jim Richards right in behind Johnson. He won't want to be held up for too long, although interestingly enough, the JPS team decided to go for the harder D3 compound Pirellis prior to the start of this event, and I would say that they'll probably be in pretty good tyre shape at the end of the distance.
Well, Francevic, the weather couldn't be better for the turbo. Nice chill in the air. It'll be operating quite nicely. No worry today with warm weather here at Oran Park. The action's hot though. Up to Yamaha corner. And there's the gap between Richards and Dick Johnson as Johnson gets once again onto the bumper of the 05 Commodore. Study of concentration. Wouldn't worry about talking to Dick at this stage of the race. I think he's got more on his mind. And that's a win here today in the Castrol Grand Final. Coming out of Castrol corner, incidentally, and Johnson this time comes down the inside of Brock. Brock's car might have a little too much squirt for it in the straight. Dyno telling Johnson what his lap time looked like, a 17.6.
Yes, and Dick Johnson's lap record here in the old Group C car is a 1:17.4. That's just how hard they're pushing the Group A cars.
Here we go again with Dick Johnson closing up between, or closing up on Peter Brock. The right-hander now, of course, at Volvo. The run down the short straight to the next right-hander. Francevic is already up on a slower car and taken him. What have we got, a Dolomite or something there in the way? Yes. Now, from this point on, Johnson should make a little bit of ground here on Peter Brock through this next series of corners. Williamson goes through, and Richards once again joins onto the tail of Dick Johnson. There's Kent Bagent, car number 3, obviously with a tyre problem.
Yeah, he qualified extremely well on the third row of the grid. Hasn't been sighted since. Apparently hit a bump on the edge of the track and got the tyre jammed up under the guard. You can see they're having to hammer it out of the way there to get the tyre off and a new one on. But back at the track, and this is the way it goes.
We're into the 6th lap of
Can't take a trick, can I?
35. But the action's all out there. It's in the pits and on the racetrack. Francevic stretching his lead slightly as they try to find the tyre and wheel to go under the guard. Brock still in second. 0-5 Commodore and Tricky Dicky from the Sunshine State in the Palmer Motorcraft Mustang. Right behind him is the Australian Championship Series leader, Jim Richards, in the JPS BMW 635.
As you predicted, while all this is going on, Francevic is slipping just that little further away.
Robbie's never been short of confidence. I would say Robbie at this stage just thinking to himself, this race is mine.
Notice on the front of the Mustang that Dick Johnson is using those BBS extractor fans on the wheels to pull some cool air through the middle of the wheel. Johnson was saying earlier on that cools the brakes by some 200 degrees. Some smoke coming from the front right-hand side of the Volvo as he just locks up. And there's Neville Crichton in strife. Car number 31 out and off to the side of the course.
And that is the first time we've seen one of the Frank Gardner prepared cars pull out of a Touring Car Championship round.
And just as we cut away, he was unbuckling the safety harness, so he's not going any further.
So Neville Crichton exits in the 31, the second of the JPS BMWs. Meantime, Robbie Francevic of New Zealand leads in the Silver Turbo Volvo. Second spot still being held down by Peter Brock. He's got Dick Johnson glued to his tail as they go down to the left-hander and Jim Richards sitting in behind them. Watch the front end of the Turbo Volvo here as he gets it right down, stands on the brakes. Brock goes through, Johnson and Richards.
The last time through, I had Robbie Francevic at a low 1:16. If that's the case, it's a new lap record.
That breaks the Group C.
Yep. Which is
the
not
whole
bad,
Big Banger record. So the Group A's have certainly found their niche here today in the 10th round.
And the great news is they get even quicker the next time we bring you motor racing from Amaroo Park with some changes to the car. Second place, Peter Brock. Third, Dick Johnson. Behind him, Jim Richards. Still Peter Williamson behind.
In fact, there's some smoke coming out. I think that's only a brake lock up again. Francevic's Volvo's been popping one there just about every lap. Dick Johnson got a little offline coming on the approach to the bridge about 2 laps ago, and he's been trying to pull back that gap on Peter Brock. He's opened up a little over Jim Richards, but that's the order as they go down into Castrol for the next time, the left-hander. So the Australian Touring Car Championship, the Castrol Grand Final from Oran Park. Robbie Francevic of New Zealand leads. Second spot held by Pete Brock in the Commodore, and third place to Queensland's Dickie Johnson.
At Oran Park, Dick Johnson putting the boot into Peter Brock in second and third placings on the track in this final round of the Touring Car Championship. Robbie Francevic in the Volvo car 21 is up front. Brock in second place, Johnson third, Jim Richards just behind him, but Johnson has had a couple of goes in the last lap or two to try and get under Brock, and here he is closing up again right on the tail of the dealer team Commodore.
It's been close, this scrap. He's got alongside Brock on a couple of occasions. Francevic still leads it. Brock and Johnson, that's where the action is at this stage as they head down the start-finishing straight. How close can you be to Brock as they take the left-hander at Pepsi? Then into this continuing left-hander that brings them back beneath the Goodyear Bridge. Now from here on, this is where Johnson has been putting a lot of pressure on Peter Brock. Brock's car, as I mentioned before, in the last lap or so has got a little bit on the skatey side. Johnson has been sitting right in there. Richards can't do much about it. The track needs to be about another 100 foot wider, and he needs to be travelling at about another 30 k's to do anything about it. So Brock finds himself under a little bit of pressure here from Johnson and, of course, the ever-present Jim Richards.
Well, things are as good as gold for Kiwi Robbie Francevic up front, aren't they?
They certainly are, and he's still popping that...
I wish he'd stop doing that.
Yes. He still pops it every time through that corner, but he's got a reasonable buffer.
That time through, I got him into 1:18.5, so the pace has dropped off a couple of seconds from the opening laps. And Johnson again clawing all over the back of the Commodore, now dives for a run to the inside, can't pull it off. Brock locks up through on the inside. Did he touch it? Yes, I think he may just have given Peter, a little bit of a nudge coming out of the left-hander.
Wasn't too much that Johnson could do about it.
No.
But that sort of stiffened everyone up for about 5 or 6 seconds. Johnson's...
Look at Richards.
Johnson has backed off to see what Richards was going to do, or see what Brock was going to do. Oh, look at Richards straight here underneath, and that was not what Johnson had in mind, and Richards has gone through. Just that one problem with Peter Brock, but we've got problems because you can see the back tyre on Richards' car is rubbing up against the guard.
We've had this happen a couple of times with the BMWs.
Yes, well, it was the front left last weekend, and the same thing happened up at Surfers Paradise, and now we've got the back right hand all dished in.
Yeah, that could have been just with the bruise with Johnson's car.
Yeah. Well, it was very close there in the opening couple of laps.
I think Johnson might have suffered something himself in that little encounter with Brock, because he's backed off quite dramatically to allow Richards to get under him there.
What happens, of course, is you lose your momentum, and in these cars you just can't afford to do that. And you give half a second away, it takes a long time to get it back.
So no problems at this stage for race leader Robbie Francevic. Brock has managed to get out of that little entanglement he had with Dick Johnson. Now he's got Jim Richards right on his tail. There's Neville Crichton coming back into the pit area. I would imagine a very disappointed Neville Crichton.
Implications there are, of course, that this may spoil the JPS BMW plans for a Quinella finish in the Touring Car Championship with Crichton out, because he may not now finish second to Richards in the championship.
It could be.
No, if it was going to stay as is at the moment, you'd find obviously that Richards would win. Johnson would be second and Brock would come up to third, and again the back right hand doing a lot of smoking. I think it is definitely the tyre. It doesn't look to be differential or coming from anywhere else under the car.
No, it's just rubbing on the guard, and Johnson would be aware of this, and whether or not he is going to risk stretching the Mustang at this stage.
The crew are readying themselves for a stop. They'd only do that if, in fact, the tyre actually deflated, because you couldn't afford to come into the pits and give away something like a minute by the time he got in, got out, and changed the wheel. There it is. Centre locking wheels on the Group A BMW, just one nut in the middle. They're ready with the jack, but that would be a last and desperate measure.
Talking about desperate measures, Jim Keogh, car 20's been black flagged and told to get off the course. For what reasons, we're not sure.
Well, the car's been smoking quite a bit in the last few laps, dropping oil. Frank Gardner in consultation with Neville Crichton.
So Francevic leads, Brock second, Richards third, Johnson fourth. Peter Williamson in the under 3-litre Toyota Supra is in 5th place on the track, followed in turn by Kent Bagent, then John Harvey and Colin Bond.
Yes, and it's an under 3-litre car that's actually leading this race as well, because the Volvo comes in at about 2,998 cc's. So Richards, it's marvellous what a difference a week makes between rounds. I just can't believe how quick Francevic is.
Well, Francevic said yesterday his only problem was shocks, and if they were waiting yesterday for advice that some shocks that they'd flown in from Europe, if they arrived, he felt they had the game plan down pat.
They had big troubles because they were using a very hard poundage rate of spring, and they couldn't get a shock absorber to handle that particular stiff rate of spring. Obviously, they've managed to overcome it. In fact, Wayne Eckersley said last night, the team managers, they felt they'd come up with a compromise, but look at Dick Johnson.
I've been trying to spot any damage to Johnson's car, but if there is any, it's on the front right, and it's very hard from this angle to pick it up.
I don't think Johnson has a problem. I think it was just a loss of momentum. Number 1 with Brock, and then number 2 with Richards.
Yeah, see, Dick's got about 285 brake horsepower, which is down about 15 on both Brock and certainly on Richards. And once he gets out from behind the toe of the other cars, that's it. I mean, it's very hard to get back.
Well, Richards has certainly got the momentum rolling at the moment in 3rd spot.
Really what Johnson needs is for Richards and Brock to start playing around, trying to pass and repass, and then he can join onto the freight train and pick up the pace.
He's got just a tiny little scar on the front right-hand corner of the car. You can see it quite clearly there, but certainly not enough to be of any problem.
I'd say that was the legacy of the coming together with Brock. So this intriguing scrap continues between Peter Brock, Jim Richards and Dick Johnson. Once again over the Goodyear Bridge and onto the back part of the course. Francevic locks up again, but still maintaining his momentum.
That's where he was having most trouble yesterday in practice. It's a little bit bumpy across that part of the course, and it tends to unsettle the car when you come to the right-hander.
But right,
The pressure's really on Brock here, because as every lap goes by at the moment, he gets further and further out to the edge of the racetrack. Johnson again getting out in the rough, saying to us yesterday that this is perhaps one of the hardest tracks on brakes, and he's got his hardest compound front brake pads in at the moment.
So Johnson chases Jim Richards, who chases Peter Brock, who finds that the Robbie Francevic Volvo is disappearing. Confirmation of placings. The Super Kiwi leads at Francevic. Second is Brocky, and third place held by Richards.
Oh, fearsome stuff as we return to Oran Park between Richards and Brock here. Almost, well, they were side by side, are again. Richards is underneath him. Brock has to yield, and Johnson also has got his nose tucked under. He's got a deflated left rear.
Yep. So bad luck to Peter Brock. Goes off with a tyre, and there goes his run for second place in the Castrol Grand Final of the Touring Car Championship. That now moves Richards up into second, and of course Dick Johnson is now to third. Robbie Francevic continues to lead, and off over on the back part of the course.
Just trying to wave the smoke away.
Another
one of the Capris, I think.
One of the Capris that has pulled out over on the back part of the course.
I think I also saw a flash of Williamson's Super as the cars speared through under the bridge as well. He is off the track and out of the race too.
Yep.
Yeah, there he is. So whatever was running so well for Williamson in the early laps has packed up in a hurry.
Bad luck for Peter Williamson. Now can Richards haul in Robbie Francevic? He's been able to pull back the early tearaways in the previous Touring Car Championship rounds. Whether or not he can do it here today, only time will tell. There's the gap.
What a familiar sight. Johnson in pursuit
yes.
of Jim Richards.
And something's a little different today. Richards is in pursuit of Robbie Francevic.
Love to know why Brock ended up with a flat left rear. I mean, I thought it was going to be Richards, the guy who had trouble with tyres, not Peter Brock.
Well, whatever the problem Richards had with that tyre rubbing, it seems to have not really bothered him. There's Peter Brock coming in. They're going to do a very, very quick change on Brock's car, try and get him back out in the race as quickly as possible.
You notice the Group A cars this year have an internal jacking system. They attach a coupling, blow the car. Martin Watt putting a new wheel back on the back left-hand side of the car. Brock would be absolutely furious. Neil Burns just fastening the wheel. And Brock would still finish, I would say, in the top 10 in this one. It's a pretty quick stop.
It was a quick stop.
Well, while all this has been going on, Brock needing a tyre change, Williamson out of the race, this moves Colin Bond, who's been doing a pretty good job of moving up himself, but this moves him even further up. He's now in 4th place on the racetrack. Great job in this little 2.5 litre Alpha.
Behind him, John Harvey in the second of the dealer team cars.
They've both dropped off Kent Bagent. They've also dropped off Tim Slako in the Rover, as well as Steve Masterton. Look at that. That's what's happened to the tyre. It looks like part of the rim has caved in there.
Well, that probably happened on the way back to the pits, of course, but certainly one dead Momo wheel, one dead Pirelli.
Well, that's cost, obviously, Peter Brock any chance of holding down that second spot in the race. Meantime, the giant killer, Colin Bond, running for Ignis Fridges, and Alpha is clawing his way up to be in company with the race leaders. This is the car, of course, that was campaigned early in the season by Alan Jones.
Yeah, this is the left-hand drive Italian Luigi-built car, which Jones vacated, and the 26 car that we've been following throughout the season is being driven today by Greg Hansford from Queensland, as you said before, Mike. And Bond was pretty unlucky yesterday in practice. He had some drama. In fact, the team had problems with fuel. In the second session of practice, they copped a contaminated batch of fuel. They effectively couldn't qualify up on the grid where they wanted to, and that put them a long way behind the 8-ball right from the word go.
Bond hasn't really dropped off John Harvey in the second dealer team car as yet. Harvey's close enough within striking distance, and also right behind them on the racetrack we've got the 2 under 2 litre Toyota Corollas driven by John Smith and Drew Price.
Well, there's the front straight, and Colin Bond once again goes through in car number 26. A sterling performance from Bondy today, with John Harvey behind him about 150 metres back in the second of the mobile dealer team Commodores. Then Steve Masterton, the next one back behind him. But
Robbie Francovic continues to lead this as we follow Bond once again through Pepsi Corner, and beneath the Goodyear Bridge is Harvey. Getting a little closer, Harvey, of course, making up a lot of his time down the straightaway here. Now Bond comes up on a slower car. The driver does the right thing and keeps out near the wall, so Bond goes through, and Harvey will be the next one into view as they go over the bridge. Is Harvey coming up on the slower car now?
John Harvey driving the car that David Parsons drove last week at Amaroo Park. The car had its spare engine fitted on Saturday night, and it's copped a little bit of damage as well on the front left-hand side of the guard, as you can see. So both Brock and Harvey this weekend having to run their spare engines, as Peter Brock also damaged his last weekend. John Harvey having his first run in the car since the Calder round of the Australian Touring Car Championship, and of course this is all in preparation for the Endurance Championship, where he'll be called upon to do some of the shared driving.
20 laps completed here out of 35. Bond pursued by John Harvey in the second of the dealer team cars. Meantime, it's Robbie Francovic who continues to lead this final round of the Touring Car Championship. That's the man.
Oh, up on two wheels.
Isn't it good to see him, though, having a run, because he's been at all the races, with the exception of the opener at Winton.
He's a great campaigner.
And a genuine nice guy. He's had problems. Everyone's poked plenty of fun at the Swedish Valiant, as they like to call it. Well, he's hung in there.
He's been up and down the field, that's for sure. He's finished as far back as 9th at Wanneroo, had a win back at Symmons Plains, also had pole position down there that weekend. Just last weekend, when he was in 3rd position and looking very good at Amaroo Park, of all things, one of the hoses to the turbo actually fell off. They hadn't done the clip up in all the engine changes during the week, and that's what put Robbie Francovic out after round 9 of the championship. The good thing about their performance this weekend is that it gives them heart to go on from here with the Endurance Championship. And of course they spent a lot of time out here at Oran Park about 2 weeks ago setting the car up and getting it right, and that hard work has obviously paid off.
He always shows grim determination, wears an open face helmet, easy to follow the facial torsions of Robbie Francovic. You notice him locking up the brake and then picking it up onto 3 wheels. Now this is the part where he's been dabbing the brake coming down into the next turn. Has been locking up. Yes, just a little lock up there, but it didn't really need to, because it was off the ground for most of the corner.
They do all their turbo adjustments on the car out here at Oran Park, because there's nowhere at Amaroo that they can get the thing wound up.
That's right. The gap between first and second, by the way, is 4.2 seconds, and that's been fairly stationary in the last couple of laps. So I'll have a look at that again in another couple of laps and just see how the gap is remaining. Francovic, they have completely rebuilt this car from absolute top to tail in the last couple of months. They have experimented with all kinds of different suspension settings. In fact, Wayne Eckersley said to me yesterday that the only thing left on the car that hadn't been changed for last weekend's Amaroo Park meeting was, in fact, that inlet hose on the turbo.
Tim Slako from West Australia was seen to advantage in the round of the Touring Car Championship that was held in his home state at Wanneroo, but hasn't had the same luck on his trip here to the east, has he?
He had a dreadful run yesterday in practice. He was so disappointed. He said, I literally have to grab the spoke of the steering wheel and just about pull with both hands to get it off the right-hander after the bridge. He said it's understeering something fierce, and he went out this morning in the warm-up, fiddled with a few settings to try and do something drastically different to the front end of the car, and feels a little bit happier about it, but still in all is a little bit disappointed with the way that it's handling.
But he's in 6th position on the racetrack the way things are going, so he's got the staying power. He's going to figure quite prominently when this gets around to flag waving time.
Yep. Well, he's done well, and I think he will benefit from the trip over here to the eastern states. Tim, of course, back there by Alf Barbagallo, West Australian racer himself, and this will be his only run on the eastern states before he heads up for the James Hardie 1000 at Mount Panorama at Bathurst. So, as I said before, he'll be glad he came over and ran the tight and twisting layout at Amaroo Park and a little more open here at Oran Park, and we'll give him an idea of what's to come and who he'll be facing by the time they get to Mount Panorama, obviously for Australia's premier touring car event, the James Hardie 1000, the first weekend of October.
He's been chopping and changing tyres in the last couple of weeks. Last weekend he ran English Dunlops, and this weekend back to Japanese Dunlops. Brian Potts goes through in basically a Group E car, then followed by John Smith, and right behind him is Drew Price. And then the man with the big cat, the Jaguar with the V12, Gary Wilmington. More horsepower in the last couple of weekends, thanks to Rolly Walker. And joining the team, incidentally, Pat Purcell, who used to build engines and do a lot of engineering for Steve Masterton. And this car going very much better than it has been in the last few rounds of the Australian Touring Car Championship.
And that's Greg Hansford in the second of the Alphas in a new paint job, because the car, in fact, has been sold to the toy shop. And
last weekend, this car broke a little distributor timing plate, which put it out at Amaroo Park. But by gee, it's going quickly. They were absolutely flying down the straight yesterday. And there's Greg Hansford in car number 27, the right-hand drive Alpha. Harry Hansford, as he's known, of course, partnered Alan Moffat in the last couple of seasons in the Stuyvesant Mazda RX-7. And what a great combination that is. And Greg finished second in last weekend's round of the Australian Rally Championship in a Mazda. And whilst Mazda are still firming up their plans for the future in Group A touring car racing, Greg's been released from his contract to have a run with Enrico Zannarini and the team this weekend, of course, backed by the toy shop. And he's doing a very good job for a fellow who hasn't really spent any time, let me see, in a circuit car. I guess it would go back to the Surfers Paradise round of the Endurance Championship last year. So it's been a long, long time between drinks. He said yesterday that slowly but surely he was starting to feel a lot more comfortable in the car. Radically different, of course, to the Mazda, which is a peripheral port, rotary-powered car, considerably lighter and with a bit of extra horsepower. And also figuring extremely well in this event today is Steve Masterton, car number 2, Masterton Homes entry, of course, absent from last weekend's round of the Touring Car Championship.
Closing fast on Tim Slaker here.
Completely having rebuilt the brake and suspension setups on the car. And yesterday, at one stage of the game, it looked as though he's going to be in third spot on the grid. That's how good they were going in practice. Steve Masterton has always performed very well at the Sydney rounds of the Touring Car Championship. He's had some bad luck this year. Started out very well with his first appearance at the Better Break Series earlier on this year, but then fell into a bit of a hole, mainly due to the fact they had a dreadful braking system on the car, which, as I said before, they've now rectified.
Here they come onto the back part of the course, and currently running third on the racetrack in the green machine is Dick Johnson. And Dick, it looks like a big day for Swedish Valiants.
Oh, mate, I don't believe it. Actually, I got screwed up. I made a terrible start, Mike, and that sort of put me behind the 8th ball, where I could normally get a bit of a gap if I got out front, because they were really holding me up in the early stages, but it's pretty obvious they're not now.
Yes, I was going to say, you've had an eventful race, a little Peter Brock almost around sideways in front of you at one stage.
Yeah, well, you know, like I dove down the inside of him, and he just pulled over on me, so it's just, that's the way it goes, mate. At least I didn't knock his tyre valve off.
Dick, you seem to lose momentum in that incident, and is that what allowed Richards to get up underneath you?
Yeah, it certainly did, and you know, that's what I mean. If we can't get a little bit of a break from them, they just blow us off down the straight here.
Dick, in the early part of the race, people were running in the low 17s and some of the leaders even the 16s. Now I notice your board has you back to an 18.4. Are the tyres going off on the car?
No, I don't think the tyres are going off. Something's vibrating like the proverbial dog trying to do razor blades.
Beautifully put, Wordsworth.
What about brakes, Dick? You said yesterday this place was very hard on brake pads.
Yeah, no, they're holding up really good. Yeah, we've got the coolers on the front wheels for today, which is the first time we've ever run them. And yeah, they just feel really good.
Were you able to spot earlier the tyre rubbing on the back guard of Jim Richards' car?
Yeah, well, I sort of give him a bit of a touch-up. The cheeky bugger went down a hole that he shouldn't have.
Yes, we noticed that.
But Jim makes his mind up once he goes through. He just goes for it. And I tell you what...
He's using plenty of road, too.
Yeah, I know, mate, but I tell you, he's going to do it once too often one day, I think.
Well, he's almost got it out in the wall there, whether that tyre's gone off or not. We'll let you go back to the race. Thanks for those few words, and we'll let you to soldier on.
Righto, mate.
Thanks, buddy.
Ta-da.
This is the man they're all chasing, Robbie Francevic, in car 21. Mark Petch Volvo, a turbocharged Volvo, and he's got a good gap on the racetrack over the second and third place cars, and this is the way they stack up at this stage with time running out. Francevic leads the final round of the Touring Car Championship from Jim Richards and Dick Johnson. Five laps to go. The question is, will the championship winner, Jim Richards, survive this final round? Look at that smoke. Guard is rubbing on the tyre. Johnson closing rapidly. This is the battle for second and third. Francevic, of course, continues to lead the race. He's hit the wall there, coming out of one of the corners. You can see the white paint on that rear guard, and it's pushed it in on the tyre.
Johnson hasn't been quick much to gain the ground, and they're coming up on a slower car. Could be Munir. Spends half the race with his arm out the wretched window, but at least he does the right thing and waves the cars by. Richards will go over the Goodyear Bridge. Johnson stalking him, looking for second place in the championship. Crowd coming alive as Robbie Francevic continues to lead this one. Richards has not backed it off. He's kept the pace on all the way, and whether or not he can last out to the finish, only time will tell. Car getting a little skatey, wearing a rib right around the tyre, I would think, on the bodywork. Down to the left-hander at Castrol again. Closest Johnson's been for several laps. Going to sit right on the tail here of Jim Richards, making sure the tyre doesn't go off. He'll switch to the inside, and Dick Johnson now makes his run. Look at the squirt of the BMW as they come down the straight. Johnson right on his tail as they come down to the braking area, and this is where the car will get unstable for Richards. A dab of the brakes, and lights up the tyre again as Johnson closes on him going beneath the Goodyear Bridge.
Gee, he'll be lucky to survive. They already had some damage on the back right-hand side of this car after the scrap early in the race, and then he clouted the wall again coming up onto the straight. He's got his fingers crossed, and so has Frank Gardner, the entire team, and everybody here. And there's a huge crowd absolutely pinned to the fence waiting to see what's going to happen.
Well, he hasn't got the foot out of the saddle, as they would say. The biggest problem would be coming out of Dunlop if it manages to pop there. He's picked the back wheel up that time over the curb. Johnson right on his tail now. Francevic continues to lead it by about 200 metres. Richards, Johnson, the crowd warming to Johnson, getting onto even terms with Richards, but to his credit, I don't know whether Richards has been able to detect through signals just how bad the tyre is wearing.
3 to go now with Dick Johnson in hot pursuit. I guess it had to happen. Richards has won the last 6 rounds of the Australian Touring Car Championship, and here comes a brave manoeuvre now from Johnson. You notice him pumping the pedal up as he came down to the left-hander at Pepsi. And Jim, who's done absolutely everything right all year, finally makes a mistake at the 10th and final round.
So Francevic leads the black BMW of Jim Richards running in second, and on the tail of Richards, Dick Johnson is in third place. Fourth place being held by Colin Bond. Fifth place by John Harvey in car number 7. Once again, the approach to the bridge. Now, over this part of the racetrack, through this next series of corners, you'll notice Johnson will get very, very close indeed.
As much as I think Jim is an absolute gentleman and a top guy to deal with, I would really love to see Dick get up here and finally go past this black BMW he's tried so hard all year. Right into the boot now of the 635 BM. Right-hander at Pepsi, and it swings left and plunging down.
Here he goes. The move of the race is Johnson back on the inside, leaves Jim as much room as Jim left him. And when they come out of Castrol corner, look at the crowd reacting. Dick Johnson has now gone through to take over second with only 2 laps remaining in the final round of the Australian Touring Car Championship. The rear view of race cam follows the little gap that Johnson has put on Richards as they head down. And of course, while all this is going on, Kiwi Robbie Francevic, the Auckland Ace, continues to lead this one, going in between the slower cars, still doing it nicely. And what cars he's got here to pass. We've got Caprice, Dolomites, everything at the back of the field. But to their credit, the drivers have been following their mirrors and letting the slower car, or letting the faster cars through without impeding their path. Coming up now on one of the Capris, Francevic, front wheel up on the curb. Now to the left-hander. And he goes by car 75 on the outside. Coming up to Yamaha corner. They drop down. Over the flip-flop now, heading down to Castrol. This will give, as Neil said earlier, a lot of heart to Mark Petch, who's provided Robbie Francevic with this car for the Australian Touring Car Championship Series. He leads on to the straightaway again. 1 lap to go. The last lap board is out for Robbie Francevic. He takes it. Next one across the mark will be Dick Johnson, followed by Jim Richards. He's going to soldier onto the finish. And Francevic, the wind in his sails and the wind going through the turbo boost, goes down to the Pepsi turn, comes out beneath the Goodyear Bridge. He's on his final lap. The man who I really thought, if everything went well for him, would win this race. I know it's easy to jump on the bandwagon halfway through it, but the laps he turned in here in practice last week, while everyone else was getting geared up for Amaroo, Francevic knew he had no chance of winning Amaroo because the course is just way too tight for the handling of the Volvo. But he spent 3 days up here. He got down under Johnson's record and knew that he'd be right this week, providing they could keep the car on the road. Well, they've done that, done it very successfully.
Well, everybody went white this morning when he went out on race tyres and a decent load of fuel and turned in a lap time in the warm-up of about 1 minute 16.1. From that point on, well, the writing was on the board.
Down to Castrol Corner for the final time. The Australian Championship Series that started at Winton in Victoria in February. And a 1-2 domination from BMW, the 10th round. And the win has gone to Kiwi Robbie Francevic in the Turbo Volvo. Second across the strike, Queensland's Dick Johnson. And third place will go to Jimmy Richards in car number 62. That's the second win of the round for 21. Confirmation, Francevic the winner here today. Second goes to Dick Johnson. Third goes to Jimmy Richards.
Congratulations. So the Flying Kiwi, Robbie Francevic and Volvo take the Castrol Grand Final in the Australian Touring Car Championship. Good on you.
Thank you. I guess at this time we should be thanking everybody, and indeed everyone knows that I do. So, but on behalf of Mark and the team and Castrol, who have been so good to us, I'd really like to thank the public of Australia. It got behind me early in the season and it stuck with me. And you stay on there, because when we get to Bathurst, this is nothing.
Trophy from John Ellicock, the General Manager of Castrol in Australia. Deserved victory for Robbie Francevic, who's been a great trier through the Australian Touring Car Championship for the 1985 season. Of course, Jim Richards is the championship winner. You can't take anything away from Jim, though, can you? 7 rounds out of 10.
You certainly can't. He had a fabulous team behind him, and Jim drove real hard all year, and that's why I didn't want him to get behind me today.
Dick Johnson, Peter Brock, there was a hell of a tussle going on out there behind you today.
Oh, I was watching it, don't worry.
Robbie Francevic is the king of the castle in round 10 of the Touring Car Championship, the final round. As he said, look out, there are big things to come from him as the Endurance Championship now gets into full swing. And now let's take you back to Mike Raymond.
Today's telecast of the Castrol final wraps up our telecast series of the Australian Touring Car Championship. There's a lot more motor racing to come, of course, on 7 throughout the year, including selected rounds of the Australian Endurance Championship and, of course, the big one, the James Hardy 1000 from Mount Panorama at Bathurst. However, the series has been an exciting one, and we'd like to thank those who participated with us throughout the year. And I refer to TVW7 in Western Australia, of course, ADS7 in South Australia, to HSV in Melbourne, our old friends at BTQ, Channel 7 in Brisbane, and of course our home team here at Channel 7 in Sydney. On behalf of the executive producer of Motorsport, Jeff Healy, and the Confederation of Australian Motorsport, we'd like to thank all those who have participated in our coverage of the National Championships. Today we recognise the members of our A-team who have helped to make these championship telecasts entertaining for you at home. Our thanks go to Unit Manager Ian Snedden, to our Telecast Director Ian Hurst, Videotape Wes Noel Brady, Director's Assistant Pip Spilsbury, Vision Mixer Ronnie Hicks, our Electronic Graphics Ace Paul Ramati, and of course our Race Cam team headed by Dave Thomas. Thanks to our Statsman Derek Heiler, and of course my fellow commentators Gary Wilkinson, Neil Crompton, and the one and only Dick Johnson.
Jim Richards, congratulations, champ.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you at Amaroo for the 300?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, we'll be there.
OK, that's the next Channel 7 motorsport commitment. In fact, August 4, Amaroo Park, the Better Breaks 300. Jim Richards, all the boys will be there for the first round of the Endurance Championship. Can you dominate it the same way you've dominated the Touring Car Series?
You're making it pretty hard.
They certainly are. You've won the series, you've won 7 rounds, but there were a few misadventures out there today.
Yes, it was good, hard, close racing. We sort of came in contact with the wall back there, which didn't help us along the way, but it was a great race. Congratulations to Robbie and Dick.
It's been a fine series. Congratulations, Jim Richards, the overall winner of the Touring Car Championship for 85. On behalf of Mike Raymond and Neil Crompton, I'm Gary Wilkinson. As I said, join us again August 4, Amaroo Park for the Better Breaks 300.